The story starts in a town with the sun hitting the rooftops. Guy calls out to Ryuji, our protagonist who's just standing there wondering why he got summoned so suddenly and what the deal is. Guy mentions that since the rest of the crew is out on a job, he was planning on giving everyone the day off. But he looks Ryuji right in the eye and tells him that as of today, he's officially kicked out of the party. Ryuji just stands there completely stunned. He can't even process what his leader just said, just like always in the Barnish stories, but here, Guy doesn't hold back and asks if he really has no idea how useless he is when things actually get violent. But Ryuji just shrugs it off, saying that's obviously true since his whole job is being a support-focused enchanter. He reminds Guy that he was the one who told him he'd be a burden on the front lines, and should just stick to making magic stones to buff the team. He points out that compared to people like Minori or Suzu, who are the real heavy hitters and pillars of the group, it's a total problem if Guy is expecting him to pull his weight in the exact same way they do. Guy slams his hand onto the table, yelling that their rank is never going to go up because of him and calling Ryuji an idiot for not getting it. He points out that the rest of the party is already second rank, while Ryuji is the only one still stuck down at third rank, which means the Berserkers are never going to be recognized as a real high-level party. Guy keeps going, saying that they can totally forget about ever reaching first rank at this rate, and they'll probably just be stuck at third forever. Ryuji just stays quiet, looking at Guy as something finally clicks in his head. He thinks back to how things used to be with just him and his stepsisters, Minori and Suzu. That was the party the three of them originally started, and Guy was actually the one who forced his way into their group. Ryuji starts to speak, telling Guy to wait a second as he realizes what's actually happening. He asks Guy if he only joined their group with the plan to kick Ryuji out from the very start. He pushes further, asking if that's the real reason Guy had Sean take his sisters out on a job this morning just to get them out of the way. Guy tells Ryuji to stop making things up, then gives him a nasty look while saying that trash like him is meant to be thrown away. Ryuji stands there in the dark, realizing that following a guy like this was a huge mistake. He says he gets it now, but he's not just walking away quietly. He shouts right in Guy's face that he's the one who's done with this whole group. Ryuji pulls out a piece of paper and tells Guy he's taking back every single magic stone he ever lent him. He holds up the official document he's been keeping this whole time to show he's serious. Guy looks completely confused, asking what he's even talking about since he thought all the stones were shared party property. Ryuji corrects him immediately, pointing at the paper and explaining the contract clearly says the stones were a loan, not a gift. He keeps the pressure on, telling Guy that if he doesn't return them, he'll be more than happy to settle things in court. Ryuji just waits for that to sink in, looking totally calm while Guy starts to sweat. He specifically mentions that Guy is missing the rare stones of sublimation, leaving Guy standing there with nothing left to say. Ryuji points out how ironic it is that Guy looks down on enchanters while he asks if Guy is really going to just rely on magic stones to get by now. Guy loses his temper and screams at him to shut up, then snaps that he's had enough and throws a stone straight at Ryuji's chest. Ryuji doesn't even flinch, just says it was a nice throw and confirms that this covers everything he was owed before telling Guy goodbye. As Ryuji walks out the door, he tells Guy to say hi to Minori and Suzu, leaving the old party behind and heading over to a quiet tavern to think. He sits there weighing his options, knowing he has the cash but no real leads yet, and decides not to stress it since his sisters are strong enough to see him later. Ryuji thinks about how he needs to start networking and making some moves, but his thoughts get cut off by a girl nearby yelling that she's officially done teaming up with her partner, and Lean looks completely crushed, asking Marie why she's doing this so suddenly. Marie snaps back that she's just repeating what everyone else is saying, since Lean is an alchemist who only makes medicine, and it's becoming a huge burden for Marie to finish quests alone while Ryuji just sits there with his drink, thinking to himself that getting kicked out of a party must be the new trend or something, but he quickly decides it's probably better to mind his own business and just watch. Lean tries to defend herself, saying she's not good in a fight, which is why she suggested making offensive potions and other gear instead, but Marie cuts her off and shouts that her lack of combat skills is exactly the problem. She goes on a rant about how she hates having to split the gold she earned in battle with someone she considers totally useless, and pounds the table while yelling about how the whole situation couldn't be more ridiculous. Marie finishes by saying she already got scouted by a top-tier group called Berserk, so Lean is really just standing in her way now. Marie throws out a cold goodbye as she walks away, leaving Lean standing there looking totally stunned, and Lean just sinks into her seat at the empty table, while Marie heads for the exit without a single second thought. Hold up! Smash like and subscribe for more hidden manga gems. Now, I dare you to comment, I'm loving it. I bet most of you won't do it. Alright, let's continue. As Lean sits there in the shadows feeling sorry for herself, Ryuji walks up and asks if he can grab a seat, making Lean look up with her eyes full of tears, asking him who he even is. Ryuji mentions that her friend is moving on, then lets it slip that he's actually the guy who got kicked out of Berserk. He quickly apologizes for eavesdropping on her business, but Lean tells him not to worry about it as he introduces himself as Ryuji, a third-class enchanter just trying to be friendly. Lean introduces herself back as an alchemist, mentioning she's also a third-class rank, and explains that her party literally just fell apart right in front of him. Ryuji hands her a cloth and tells her to wipe her eyes for now, and Lean thanks him for being so kind. Ryuji gives her a small smile and says he knows she's going through a lot, but since they're both outcasts now, he suggests they just have a drink and relax. Lean agrees to hang out, though she mentions she's still a minor and can't actually touch the alcohol, but she's happy to keep him company. They sit together in the tavern while Ryuji finishes up his story, telling her that's basically the whole deal with how he ended up alone. He explains that his leader, Guy, was the one who kicked him out, and he finds it pretty ironic that they both ended up in the same spot. Lean tells him he can just call her by her name, so Ryuji says that means she should just call him Ryuji from now on too. She starts to get a bit formal since she's younger than him, but Ryuji just brushes it off and tells her it's really not a big deal. Ryuji changes the subject and asks if she'd be down to show him some of her medicine, since he's actually pretty interested in what she can make. Lean is happy to help and says that's fine by her, reaching into her gear to pull something out for him to see. She sets two pointed glass vials down on the table, explaining that these are the latest items she's managed to put together. As Ryuji looks them over, Lean warns him it's okay to touch the bottle, but he needs to be careful not to mess with the lid or the pin, and he tells her he's got it. Lean holds up the vial and mentions it took a long time to make, so she's really proud of how it turned out, especially since Ryuji looks it over and notices the outside seems normal. So he decides to use his magic to check out what's actually inside, and he activates his skill, saying a praise, as a magic circle shows up right in front of the bottle so the stats pop up, showing him it's a fire bomb that conjures flames with a 1-meter radius. And while he checks the power, he can't help but say that the whole thing is actually amazing. Ryuji tells her it's way stronger than the magic the Berserk mages use, making Lean freak out and say he's totally exaggerating. But he realizes the output is 4 times better than what the genius Suzu can do, and if he added his own enchantment to it, the power would be insane. So he asks her if she realizes that just being able to make something like this is an incredible feat on its own, and Lean looks down and admits he's right, mentioning that Marie actually told her the costs for the materials were just too high, and she starts to smile a little bit while saying but, as if she's about to explain the catch. Lean tells Ryuji that she really wants to make something great, even if she has to push her limits a bit to get there. She wants to put everything she has into her work, and she asks him if helping someone with her creations isn't just the best thing ever. Ryuji tells her she's totally right and they're actually a lot alike, slamming his hand on the table while Lean just looks on, completely surprised by his sudden energy. He explains that as an enchanter, he takes a huge amount of pride in what he can do and the work he puts out, and he finds it so rewarding to see the things he makes actually being used to their full potential out in the world. Lean starts to say his name, but a loud clatter from across the room makes Ryuji turn around to see what's going on. Some bald guy is making a scene at his table, screaming at the staff not to screw around with him. The guy yells that he always gets beer and meat after a quest, but the manager just stands there looking stressed while trying to get a word in. The adventurer keeps losing it, shouting that he's a second-class rank and basically the one keeping the whole town's economy alive. So the manager finally explains that the specific rare cut of meat he wanted is just out of stock, but the dude doesn't seem to care. Ryuji looks pretty annoyed, thinking about how his timing for the conversation was finally perfect until this guy started a scene. Lean looks over at the loud adventurer and mentions she can smell the alcohol on him from all the way across the room. She asks Ryuji what they should even do about it, but he just covers his mouth while a sudden idea pops into his head. He tells her she's right, and that it wouldn't be fair to ask her to work with him without actually showing her what he's capable of. Before she can even react, he grabs a bottle of medicine off the table and tells her he's borrowing it, leaving her totally confused. Lean yells his name as Ryuji walks straight up to the bald guy to confront him. Face to face, the adventurer stops his shouting for a second just to ask Ryuji who the hell he thinks he is. Ryuji keeps it cool, saying they were just trying to enjoy their drinks, and he was hoping the guy could keep the noise down a bit. The dude tells Ryuji to wipe that cocky look off his face before asking what his rank is, so Ryuji just casually says he's a third-class enchanter. The guy looks even more disgusted, saying a low-rank support who doesn't even fight on the front lines shouldn't be acting so high and mighty. Ryuji looks completely serious. Lean is right next to him, looking pretty worried about what he's about to do. He just sighs and puts a hand to his head, saying Guy was exactly the same way and how everyone is just obsessed with rank. He follows it up by saying he actually thinks there are plenty of other things just as important as a rank number. The bald adventurer loses his cool, calling it all nonsense before swinging a punch and yelling that Ryuji is ruining his drink. Ryuji doesn't even flinch, he just looks the guy dead in the eye and says he's going to show him the truth. He holds up the medicine bottle and activates his whirlwind enchantment, causing wind magic to swirl around his hand. He brings up how the guy laughed at him for not being a frontline fighter, then unleashes a massive burst of pressure. The wind hits like a truck. Ryuji tells him this is for the pride of all the hardworking craftsmen the guy was disrespecting. The adventurer gets blasted backward and hits the ground hard, while Ryuji just stands there like it was nothing. The guy scrambles to his feet and runs away screaming, leaving Lean just staring at the back of Ryuji's head in total shock. Lean is completely floored by what she just saw, whispering that there's no way it's possible while everyone else in the tavern starts losing it. They're all cheering and yelling about how insane his power is. Lean turns to Ryuji, still looking pretty dazed, and tries to ask him exactly what he just did. But Ryuji just gives her a casual smile and suggests they pay the tab and get moving, pointing out that they aren't going to get any peace and quiet in a place like this. Once they're outside, he tells her that her medicine is top tier and that the tavern would have been leveled if he used it normally. Lean just stares at him and asks if that whole explosion of power really came from his enchantment magic. He takes it in stride, confirming that he just added a bit of wind magic to the mix, and he explains how he controlled the direction so the flames wouldn't hit anything they weren't supposed to, all while using the wind to hold back the real power so the guy wouldn't actually end up in the hospital. Ryuji addresses Lean directly as they walk along the cobblestone path, saying, if he applies enchantment magic to medicine the way he just did, he can boost its effects or make it way more useful. He stops and looks her in the eyes, asking why they don't just team up, just the two of them. Lean sits back on a park bench looking a bit caught off guard and asks if he means joining up as an adventuring party, but Ryuji clarifies that even aside from a party as a fellow craftsman, he's totally in love with the work she does. He tells her they could set up a workshop and work side by side so they can live a chill life that makes everyone else jealous. He pictures it as an enchanter and an alchemist working together, suggesting they show the whole world just how amazing they really are. Lean clenches her hands in her lap, repeating the idea of running a workshop together under her breath, while Ryuji asks her what she thinks about the idea, adding that he thinks it's a pretty fair deal for both of them. Lean looks at him with tears of joy in her eyes and says yes, telling him she'd absolutely love to join him. As the clock tower hits 3, a voice suddenly calls out to Ryuji from across the way. The guildmaster Emin catches up and asks if the rumors are true about Ryuji quitting the Berserk party and skipping town, so Lean steps up and confirms it. Emin is pretty shocked to see Lean is leaving too, but she just smiles and thanks him for everything he's done for her over the years. Emin rubs his head, explaining that the guild usually has a strict policy about not getting involved in party fights, but he can't help but ask Ryuji what he's planning to do about Minori and Suzu now that he's gone. Lean looks a bit lost and asks if those two are the high-ranking members from the Berserk Guild, leading Ryuji to calmly explain that the swordsman and mage of that party are actually his younger stepsister. It all starts to click for Lean as she realizes why he was so focused on them this whole time. Moving on, Ryuji reaches into his gear and tells the guildmaster there's one last thing he needs help with. He hands over a package and tells Emin to get it to his sisters, making sure that Guy doesn't find out about it. Emin stands there in silence for a second, really feeling the weight of the request, but then he closes his eyes and says he's got it, promising to make sure the sisters get the package. As they stand by the gate, Emin looks at the two of them and asks where they're even planning to go now, and Ryuji explains he's thinking about heading to a town further away to open up a workshop together. Emin gives a little wave and says he's sure they'll meet again someday, so they should take care of themselves until then. He adds one last thing, telling Ryuji to just leave Minori and Suzu's well-being to him, which makes Ryuji smile as he looks back and gives the guildmaster a genuine thank you. Lean joins in with a big smile, telling the guildmaster to stay safe too as they finally start heading out. They start walking down the dirt road away from the city, but Lean eventually speaks up to get his attention. She asks if it's officially settled that they're moving to Southstead after all. Ryuji mentions how the main road goes right through the town, plus it's close to a magic stone mine, which makes it the perfect spot for them to finally set up their own workshop together. He points out that since they're walking, it's going to take about half a month to get there, and while Lean knows they need to save money, she can't help but worry about such a long trip. She reminds him they don't have a choice since they were both kicked out and have no money coming in. So Ryuji adds that they're definitely going to need to find some cash to actually build the shop once they arrive. He looks over at her with a smile and says they've got nothing but time, so they should just take it easy. Lean looks back at him and agrees that he's probably right about just relaxing for the ride. As they walk down the road, Ryuji says he'll be in her care from now on, and Lean happily says the same, traveling together under the stars as the first night of their new lives begins. Out in the woods, a group of bandits spots some travelers and notices their armor belongs to the royal army. The leader of the crew mocks the knights for being dressed so well, joking about how the taxpayers bought them such nice gear. The guards immediately realize they're being ambushed by bandits, and the lead knight tells Lady Sesai to get back, but the bandit leader just smiles and says he won't repeat himself, demanding they leave every single thing of value behind. Lady Sesai looks worried, feeling like something bad is definitely going to happen before they ever make it to the frontier. Meanwhile, Ryuji looks up at the stars and decides it's time for them to set up camp for the night. Lean mentions that if they keep this pace they'll reach Southstead tomorrow, and Ryuji just nods along. As they settle in, Lean gets curious and asks Ryuji why he even decided to become an enchanter. Ryuji looks off to the side and tells her it's a pretty long story, but he's willing to share. The campfire just keeps on crackling between them while they rest up for the long walk ahead. Ryuji looks into the fire and mentions the Sakura Empire way out on the eastern edge of the continent, telling Lean that's actually where he grew up. He explains the place is named after cherry blossoms, and usually the flowers would be blooming all over the country right about now. But his mood shifts. He admits that after the war, he has no idea if any of those beautiful views are even still there. Lean looks totally caught off guard, asking him if there really was a civil war back in his homeland. Ryuji confirms it, looking back on the time he lost both of his parents when he was just a 12-year-old kid. He remembers having to get out of the country, dragging his little sisters Minori and Suzu along through the smoke, as they were all left with nothing after their families were taken by the fighting. Lean tells him that sounds like a lot for anyone to deal with, and Ryuji just quietly agrees that it really was. He adds that things changed when Master took them in, teaching them every skill they needed to survive on their own. Lean repeats the name, wondering who this mysterious person could be. Ryuji looks down at his drink, mentioning that the guy never actually gave them a name, so he just calls him Master and goes on to say the man was pretty harsh, but he's the one who taught him the basics of fighting and magic. It turns out Master was also the one who realized Ryuji had a real talent for enchantment, and Ryuji smiles, saying that because of that training, he finally feels like he's found what he's meant to do. Then he drops a surprise, telling Lean that his teacher was actually an elf just like her, which leaves her totally stunned and gives him another reason why he felt like he couldn't just walk away and leave her on her own. He admits he couldn't stand the thought of her getting used by people who had no idea what she was actually worth, but then he stops and bows his head, apologizing for dragging her along just to make himself feel better about the situation. Lean looks completely flustered and immediately tells Ryuji to stop bowing, explaining that since they're both in the same boat now, he really shouldn't be worrying about it. Lean smiles and tells Ryuji she's actually really glad he reached out to her back at the guild. She starts to say something else, but then Ryuji just looks at her and says it's a relief to know she feels that way. He seems genuinely happy that things aren't awkward between them. He suddenly remembers the medicine she showed him back at the tavern and tells her he's got some magic stones he's been meaning to show her too. Lean gets all excited and says she'd love to see what he's got, so Ryuji reaches out with his gloved hand and pulls them out. Lean is totally caught off guard by the size of them. She can't believe those are magic stones because they look just like massive, expensive jewels. Ryuji explains that their power actually changes depending on how well someone can cut and shape them. He starts pointing them out one by one, identifying the adamant, frigid, and sealing stones, but as he begins explaining what they do, the two of them suddenly freeze. Lean looks over her shoulder, sensing something weird in the air while Ryuji instantly goes on high alert. Lean asks him what's going on, and he tells her to look over by the trees. Ryuji stops and listens closely. He can clearly hear people fighting and the loud clashing of metal nearby, meaning Lean realizes things are getting dangerous. She tells him she can't hear what they're saying, but they sound like bandits, and Ryuji keeps his focus on the noise. He knows that with the fight happening this close, they can't just ignore it, it's their problem now. He points out that if those guys really are bandits, there's a good chance they'll be the next targets anyway. Ryuji turns to Lean and says he's planning on jumping in to help, but he needs to know if she can actually fight. Lean doesn't hesitate. She tells him she's perfectly fine with that and they need to move fast. Ryuji gives the word to head out, and the two of them start rushing toward the sounds of the struggle. As they run, Ryuji tells her he's going to use this chance to show her what those magic stones can really do in a fight. Up ahead, the battle is in full swing with sparks flying and weapons hitting hard. It looks like the lead bandit is already winning. He mocks his opponents, asking what's wrong while noticing their movements are slowing way down. The guards are struggling to hold the line. The main guy yells for everyone to keep it together because they have to protect Lady Cease at all costs. Lean and Ryuji finally reach the clearing. She points toward the chaos and lets him know they've found the spot, as Ryuji looks over and says he sees them. He asks Lean if she can draw their attention and she's already on it. She tells him to leave it to her, immediately getting her magic ready to go. A glowing circle appears in front of her while she chants for the fire to burn her enemies. She lets out a bunch of fire arrows that fly straight into the crowd of bandits. One of the bandits gets hit directly. He lets out a scream as the magic catches him off guard. The lead bandit looks back with a look of total shock. He didn't expect anyone else to show up, realizing they've got reinforcements to deal with. Ryuji slides right into the middle of the fight with a smirk, telling the guys he wants to get in on the fun too. One of the bandits gets pissed off and starts cursing him out, but Ryuji isn't just standing there talking. He blocks an attack and immediately fires back with a huge kick that sends the guy flying through the air. Ryuji looks pretty bored with the fight, wondering if these bandits are really all they've got. He thinks to himself that compared to Minori's skills, these guys are basically playing around, but one bandit thinks he's got an opening. He lunges at Ryuji's back, yelling that he's wide open, only to get blasted backward the second his sword makes contact. Ryuji doesn't even bother to turn around, just letting the guy fly away as the bandit loses it. He's completely shocked, staring at his blade and trying to figure out how his attack just got deflected like that. Ryuji holds up a diamond mana stone for the guy to see. He starts explaining how the thing works, telling him the effect is that it completely cancels out any physical hits against whoever's holding it. While the guy is still processing that, Ryuji nails him with a punch that leaves him groaning. Over on Lean's side, she's finishing things up with her magic. She calls for a web of lightning to trap everyone, shouting out her spark web spell so the remaining bandits end up tied up on the ground. Ryuji looks over the pile of guys and asks if that's the whole group, and Lean says it is. She checks in on the knights to make sure they're all right. The lead guard tells her they're fine and thanks them for jumping in to help, and then the hooded woman steps forward with a smile. She apologizes for the late introduction and tells them she's Lady Cease. Lady Sessa starts to step forward, but the lead knight stops her immediately, telling her she can't do that. She looks pretty shaken as she backs off, so Ryuji tries to keep things chill. He tells her it's fine and that he gets they have their own reasons for staying low, so she shouldn't worry about it. Then he adds that they only helped out to make sure their own campsite stayed safe for the night. While Lean just watches, the lead knight speaks up, telling them they're really grateful for the help. He asks Ryuji and Lean to let his group handle taking care of the bandits from here. Lean looks at the knight and notices how beat up the guards are. She calls out to him and then pulls out a small potion bottle. She asks if they need some healing medicine, though she worries she might be overstepping a bit, but the knight hesitates. He looks at his wounds and says they're just minor, but he's clearly still bleeding. Ryuji catches on to the vibe and says it's totally normal to be weirded out by taking medicine from a total stranger. Moving on, he holds up his own arm to show off a small scratch. He says he got it from some bushes while they were rushing over to help, and that the timing is actually perfect for a test. Lane looks at him completely confused, asking what he's even planning to do. Ryuji pours the potion onto his scratched arm to prove it's safe, and tells the lead knight there's nothing suspicious about the drink before asking if he wants it now. So the other guards start shouting that they want some too, making the lead knight try to shut them up. But Lady Sessai steps in and tells the knight diet that he needs to settle down. Then she looks at him and says she'll take full responsibility for whatever happened. The knight tries to argue, but Lady Sessai just gives him a look that shuts him down completely. Moving on, Ryuji introduces himself and mentions he's planning to open up a workshop in Southstead. He tells the group that if they like the medicine, they should come by and visit him. Later, Ryuji explains he realized those people were high-ranking and acted on it, then apologizes to Lean for dragging her into the mess, and he says he's also sorry for using her medicine without asking her first. Lean mentions that dealing with nobility is fine and all, but she was honestly shocked he just drank the potion without a second thought. Ryuji replies that it's only natural for a knight to be cautious, and it was the right move for the guy to make, though he admits that seeing Lean's good intentions get doubted like that just didn't sit right with him, and Lean just stands there for a second holding her staff, watching him walk ahead. She gives a warm smile and says that kind of selfless move is just so typical of him. Ryuji stretches his arms out and points out how late it's getting, asking if they should head back to camp. Lean agrees and suggests they get some rest now so they can be ready for tomorrow. And soon the scene shifts to the far southwestern point of the continent, where the city of Southstead is located. It's a major strategic spot for the Kingdom of Bastein since it has a huge harbor, at least, that's how it's supposed to be, but a woman standing nearby looks like she's having a rough time. Ryuji looks around the quiet building and mentions how the town isn't nearly as lively as he thought it would be, and Lean agrees, pointing out that it makes sense considering the sad state the Adventurers Guild is in right now. Ryuji walks up to the counter and awkwardly asks the receptionist if her name is Anne, trying to start the process of moving in, but he has to stop and ask if this place is actually even Southstead. The receptionist looks pretty drained as she confirms that they are definitely in the right city, but even though there are highways leading north and east and a mine just around the corner, everything feels off. This spot used to be a massive transportation hub right on the water, and everyone knew Southstead as the place to be, so Lean just looks on in confusion and asks if she's got that right. It turns out everything went downhill about a year ago when the magic stone supply dropped and the mine ended up closing. To make things worse, a huge earthquake hit the area and wrecked the port, leaving the city with no way to recover. Anne explains that with the new highways and trade routes popping up in other places, the amount of people actually passing through this town has totally dropped off lately. Ryuji stands there looking pretty stressed. It's definitely not the lively start he was expecting. Anne asks Ryuji what his plan is and if he wants her to just go ahead and process the residency paperwork anyway, but Lean jumps in to say that if Ryuji is down for it, then she's on board too. Ryuji takes a second to think before deciding to just tell them the truth about why he's here, explaining that there's a specific reason he felt like he had to transfer to this specific city. Outside the building, Anne's voice carries as she asks them one last time if they're really sure about this, and Lean tells Ryuji that after hearing his reason, she totally thinks this should be their priority, so she tells him not to even sweat it. Ryuji just gives her a grateful look and thanks her. Anne lets them know the registration is all finished up and says she's excited to work with them, and Lean tells her they really appreciate the help. Then Lean mentions that they're actually thinking about setting up a workshop right here in town, explaining that they've already started looking for the right property to move into. Anne gets a bright idea and says that if that's the case, she knows just the person, introducing them to a guy named Thor who can get them an intro at the Commerce Guild. Thor introduces himself and tells the group he's already heard all about their situation from Anne. As they start heading out, Thor points out that it's a pretty long walk to get to this specific property, and Ryuji agrees it's definitely a bit out of the way from the center of town. Thor explains that despite the distance, the place is perfect for a workshop since the rent and location are just right. The group finally makes it to the location, and Thor lets them know they've arrived, presenting a large stone building as one of the properties he has available for them. Lean is pretty shocked by the size of the place, while Ryuji points out it might actually be a little too big, but he's interested and asks Thor for permission to head inside and check it out. The inside is completely covered in dust and cobwebs, showing just how long it's been empty. After looking around at the empty rooms, Ryuji turns to Lean to see what she's thinking, and she admits it's going to need a lot of scrubbing, but the nearby forest makes it a perfect choice. Ryuji makes the call right then and there, telling Thor he'll take the house and thanks him for the deal. Thor is caught off guard by how fast they decided, but he tells them he'll rush back to the guild for the papers, leaving Ryuji to ask if they can get a head start on cleaning the interior while they wait. Thor smiles and gives them the green light, saying since they agreed to the contract, they should go right ahead. As they look at the property, Ryuji mentions that because they signed so fast, Thor is letting them use the materials outside for free, but Lean looks at the massive stack of logs and points out that they look pretty heavy to move. Ryuji pulls out a glowing gem and tells her that's where his magic stone of Herculean strength comes in handy. Lean is caught off guard, but Ryuji just smiles and says with this stone, all that manual labor is going to be a total breeze. That gets Lean hyped up, and she tells him that if he's doing that, then he should leave all the work inside the house to her. She's feeling pretty proud of herself, claiming that with her alchemy, fixing up or making new furniture is basically a piece of cake. Ryuji agrees that the plan sounds solid, telling her it's time to finally get started on the place. Lean gives a loud shout of agreement as they prepare to turn the old building into their new home, and she immediately gets to work, pulling out her staff and letting her magic shine. Inside the house, a magic circle glows on the floor as furniture starts popping into existence. Lean goes all out with her alchemy, crafting shelves and tables while Ryuji handles the heavy lifting. And even though the work is intense, they manage to finish the entire interior in record time. They stand back to look at their new workshop, completely stocked with all the alchemy gear they need to get moving. But when Thor walks back in, he completely freezes. He apologizes for the wait but immediately stops to ask what they even did to the place. The room is totally transformed from a dusty shell into a high-end lab, and Thor can't help but stare at the change. He tells them it's seriously impressive that they managed to come this far in such a short amount of time, and Lean just beams with pride, cheering about how she really gave it her best effort. Moving on to business, Thor pulls out the final paperwork and tells them to sign the contract if there aren't any issues. Ryuji says okay, but then Lean notices Thor is carrying a ton of extra luggage. Ryuji looks closer and asks if he's actually carrying a bunch of vegetables. Thor gets a bit awkward, saying it's just a personal matter, and then admits it's probably just him being a hypocrite. Lean looks pretty confused by what Thor just said, repeating the word hypocrisy back to him, But before he can explain, she notices something moving in the bushes outside the workshop. She spots two elf girls hiding among the trees and asks out loud if they're really elves. Thor walks right up to them with a smile, telling them he finally found them and brought over more vegetables for the day. The older girl lights up and calls him Big Brother Thor, thanking him for the help before telling the little one to say something. The younger girl, Lena, gives him a huge grin and chirps out a thank you. Lean thinks the kids are totally adorable and turns to Thor to ask who they actually are. Thor realizes he forgot his manners and apologizes, saying he really needs to introduce the kids to Ryuji and Lean properly. He explains that the sisters live right next door and are on their own without parents. To make things worse, their farm's soil is junk, so they can't grow any food. Lean listens with a heavy heart as Thor tells them the girls are just doing whatever they can to get by. Thor shows them the kids' rough hands, explaining they try to harvest what they can, but it's never enough, so he's been sharing his own food to keep them going. Lean stares at the girls' small, calloused hands and softly says Ryuji's name, seeing how hard they've had it. Ryuji looks out at the dead land, thinking about how bad the soil quality really is. He stays quiet for a moment while he watches the sisters sitting together in the dirt of their empty farm, a sight that clearly gets to him. He suddenly looks determined and says they're going to do it. Lean is taken back by the sudden spark in his eyes as Ryuji announces his plan to build a brand new field using his enchantment magic, claiming the possibilities of his power are actually endless. Holding a glowing stone, he repeats that they'll use enchantment magic to make a proper field for the girls. Thor looks completely baffled, asking Ryuji what he's even talking about since using enchantment for farming doesn't make any sense to him. Little Lena is just as confused. She points out that there's already a field right in front of them, leaving the whole group staring at Ryuji like he's lost his mind, while he just stands there ready to get to work. Ryuji looks out over the dead, dry field and decides to rephrase his plan since he realizes he sounded a bit intense, so he simply asks if he can cast a spell to make their vegetables grow better. Lana asks if it's really magic, while little Lena gets super excited and says she thinks healthy vegetables are a great idea. Ryuji nods and gets to work, heading out into the middle of the patch while he looks around for the perfect spot, asking the group if the place he's standing is okay. He doesn't waste any time and stomps an enchanted stone deep into the dry dirt. Looking satisfied, Ryuji says that should be enough, but Thor looks totally confused and asks if burying a rock is really all it takes. Ryuji explains that the magic stone has a specific enchantment on it, but the real surprise won't show up until tomorrow morning. He then calls the two sisters over to help him finish the ritual, but Lana is pretty unsure about what they're even supposed to do. Lean just smiles and tells the girls the secret spell is just saying, "Get well soon" to the field. Lena looks super pumped and shouts out, while Lana smiles along, happy to see her little sister so into it, and the two of them shout at the field together, telling the crops to feel better just like Lean told them to. Meanwhile, back with the old party, someone is screaming at Guy and Sean, sounding really pissed off as Minori gets right in Guy's face and demands he explain exactly what happened to Ryuji earlier that day. She's furious, yelling that if Ryuji had actually been with them, they wouldn't have struggled so hard or been forced to run away. Guy just looks annoyed and tries to brush her off, lying through his teeth that Ryuji just up and left on his own. Suzu calls him a liar to his face, saying there's no way Ryuji would ever just ditch her and the rest of the team, but Guy tries to dodge the drama by saying they should focus on retreating first, so Minori turns on Sean and barks at him to say something. Sean is internally panicking because his body feels way heavier than usual, realizing just how much they're hurting without Ryuji's buffs. Minori glares at them and cuts to the chase, asking if they're failing because they don't have the magic stone of sublimation anymore. Guy starts realizing how much he actually needed Ryuji's help, feeling completely exposed now that Minori is laying into him. She says he just wanted an excuse to kick out a miser because he hated sharing the loot, accusing him of just finding a reason to exile Ryuji. Guy is stunned she'd even used that word, so Sean tries to save face by lying. He claims Marie was the one being greedy about the money and forced Guy's hand. Marie loses it, screaming at Sean for trying to pin the whole thing on her while Suzu tries to cut through the fighting. She tells Minori they need to move before monsters show up. Minori says she knows exactly what to do, standing her ground before dropping the bombshell. She and Suzu are both quitting the party right then and there. Minori tells Suzu it's time to go, and the two of them just walk away, leaving the rest of the group behind. Marie is confused and asks Guy what's happening, but he just snaps at her to shut up and stay out of his way. Guy is absolutely fuming, cursing under his breath as he realizes his party is falling apart and back at the guild. Minori and Suzu walk through the doors and let the guildmaster know they've returned. Emin looks them over with his arms crossed. He says it's pretty rare to see the two of them looking this exhausted. Minori explains that Guy and the others completely messed up, which forced them to bail on the mission. Emin points out those fools way underestimated Ryuji's enchantment magic. Minori is stunned to realize he knew about it, so Emin just shrugs it off and asks where the rest of the guys are hiding out. Suzu tells him she left the rest of them back in the dungeon. She makes it clear that she and the others are officially done with that party. Emin says that actually works out perfectly while he reaches for a letter and hands it over, telling the two girls they need to read it immediately. Minori takes the paper and is totally shocked. She realizes the message is actually from Ryuji. Emin mentions he's been holding onto the letter since they left town. He just couldn't hand it over while Guy was around, so Suzu reads that Ryuji is waiting for them in Southstead. She turns to her friend and asks what the plan is, and Minori doesn't even have to think about it. She smiles and says she's obviously going to find him. The sun comes up over the quiet workshop the next morning while Ryuji wakes up and stretches, feeling like he finally got some good sleep, but then he hears a noise. He hears Lana yelling for him to come outside right away, and he wonders if something went wrong, so he runs out to find little Lena pointing and shouting for him to check out the field. Lean stumbles out after him, still half asleep and wondering why everyone is making such a big deal so early. Lena keeps rushing them, telling both of them they need to hurry up and see this, leading into the whole group standing in the field, totally stunned by the massive crops that grew overnight. Ryuji admits he didn't think his work would be this effective, while the kids just cheer about how cool the whole thing is, and Lena tells Ryuji his magic is incredible. Lana can't even believe all of this happened in just one night, so Ryuji explains that he buried something called a pura mana stone yesterday, which he'd specially enchanted to make the crops grow faster. Lean asks if he means the god of fertility, then wants to know if he's really never used a stone like that before. But Ryuji just says adventurers are basically drifters who don't stay in one spot, and Lean has to admit that's a fair point. Lena stands there as her stomach growls loudly. She's clearly hungry. Lean catches on and suggests that since they're already outside, she might as well get started on making everyone some breakfast. So she tells Lana and Lena to go gather some of the fresh vegetables, and the two of them are more than happy to help out. Ryuji tells the group it's officially time to start the harvest, and Lena gives a big shout as they get to work. The sisters smile as they carry crates full of fresh, giant vegetables. Everyone sits down to a massive spread of fresh greens, and the sisters can't wait to dive in. The food is gone in a flash. They didn't even leave a single scrap on the plates. Lana leans back saying she's totally stuffed, while Lena just looks happy to finally have a full stomach. Lean smiles and says she hopes everyone liked the meal, and Ryuji looks pretty content with how things turned out. But he turns to Thor and admits that even though they have food now, things still aren't exactly perfect, which surprises the girls. Ryuji explains that when he was out in the fields earlier, he noticed the soil looked even worse than yesterday. He brings up that pura magic stone he used to speed up the harvest, explaining that while it worked, the stone actually sucks all the water and nutrients out of the ground. So eventually the land will just die, and Lean realizes this is where she comes in. She steps up and asks if it's finally her turn to help. Ryuji asks if she can make something to fix the soil, and when she says she can find the ingredients in the forest, he tells her to go for it. Ryuji looks a bit confused and asks the others what they're getting at, but Lean just gives a big smile, telling everyone that if they leave things to her and Ryuji, everything will turn out fine. Ryuji tells Lana and Lena he's giving them those lucky stones, then mentions that Lean will be the one in charge of fixing up the soil. The girls are caught off guard. Lana looks at him and asks if he's really sure about giving those stones away. Ryuji says he's sure, but asks for a favor in return. He wants them to let Lean use a part of their field. He explains that since she's an alchemist making medicine, she needs a spot to grow all the different plants for her work. Lana says she's down to let them use the field, but admits there might be a big problem, so Ryuji leans in and asks her what exactly is bothering her about the idea. Lana explains that wild boars keep raiding the area, and she's worried Lean's part of the field will just get trashed by them. Ryuji just smiles, telling her he understands the situation and that it's actually going to be a pretty easy fix. Ryuji pulls out a crystal and notes that there's just enough soil in the corner of the field for his plan, so he holds up a mudcore magic stone that starts glowing with a bright, intense light until a massive golem made of thick mud and earth pulls itself together right in the middle of the field. Ryuji points at the creature and officially names it Spriggan, ordering it to chase away any wild beasts that try to mess with the people or the crops. The magic stone sits perfectly in the center of the golem's back as it stands ready to work, but Lean looks at the giant thing and asks if he can really just whip up golems using enchantment magic like it's nothing. Ryuji mentions that alchemists create golems and things all the time, so he doesn't see the big deal. But Lean looks totally defeated and says they definitely don't make them this easily, feeling like her own skills are kind of useless now. Moving on, Ryuji turns back to the group and tells Thor that the field's boar problem should be fixed for good, leaving Thor just standing there completely stunned, saying the whole thing happened way faster than he ever expected. Lean smiles warmly at Thor, telling him that everything he has done for the two sisters until now matters, and she promises that they will be there to help him from now on. She asks him to stop being so hard on himself and calling his kindness hypocrisy, because she really believes his actions are something he should be truly proud of, and Thor looks relieved and moved by her words, simply thanking her for understanding. Moving on, Ryuji brings up the logistics of the farm, asking if the merchant guild can handle the harvesting and sales after leaving enough food for Lana and Lena. So Thor agrees immediately, promising that they will take care of everything so the girls never have to worry about money again. Ryuji tells the girls it's great that they can finally eat their fill every day, but they look a bit overwhelmed and ask if he's sure he should be doing this much for them. Ryuji just pats one of them on the head and tells them kids shouldn't worry about stuff like that, since people are supposed to help each other out, and he explains that he actually used to be in the same boat as them a long time ago, smiling as he remembers how he received plenty of help himself back in those days. The two sisters can't hide their joy, smiling bright as they both thank Ryuji for everything he's done, and Ryuji looks out over the area, noting that since the work on the fields is finally finished, it's time to figure out what comes next. Lean speaks up and says they should focus on his business now, since he's already spent so much time helping them. So Ryuji stops to think about their options for a second before turning to Thor to ask for some advice. He asks if the abandoned mines nearby are actually off-limits to the public, and Thor looks a bit surprised but tells him that anyone is free to come and go as they please, though he warns Ryuji that the place was abandoned once the magic stone production dried up, so he probably won't find anything valuable. Watching them talk, Lean thinks back on their journey since forming a party, realizing Ryuji has always been the one carrying the load, which makes her even more determined to step up and finally be someone he can really count on from here on out. The group heads out to the burn mine, sitting high in the mountain. Lean suddenly loses her footing on the rocks, letting out a quick shout as she trips and struggles to stay upright. She promised herself she'd do her best to help out, but the trail is already proving to be a lot more than she bargained for. She yells out to Ryuji, wondering how their simple trip turned into this kind of mess, while he just tells her to keep running and wonders if these crazy accidents are just part of the job when trekking through the mountain. The huge, snowy peaks of the burn mine range are all around them, making the narrow cliffside path they're walking on look incredibly small and sketchy. Ryuji tells her to watch her step as the ground starts cracking under their feet, and Lean can't help but let out a nervous breath as she tries to find some solid ground to stand on. Ryuji looks back at her with a worried face, checking in to see if she's actually holding up all right, because he admits he's been on edge for a while now. He tells her he's been seriously worried she's going to trip and end up hurting herself on these rocks. Lean gives him a nervous smile and says she's fine for now, even managed to stay on her feet so far without falling, though internally she's totally losing it. She tells herself she has to keep going, but she's crying on the inside because this adventure isn't going anything like she thought it would. She stares ahead with a serious look, trying to keep her focus, but there's still something that's been bothering her ever since they left the main road. The closer they get to the mine, the more the atmosphere seems to change along the quiet mountain path. The path through the mountains is falling apart, making every step feel more dangerous than the last since the ground is completely wrecked. Ryuji points out that the earthquake was actually strong enough to destroy the harbor, so the mountain is in bad shape. Lean adds that there are probably landslides blocking the way in the worst spots, but she still has something on her mind. She admits it might be a rude thing to ask, but she wants to know why Ryuji is even heading to a place like this. She reminds him that both Anne and Thor said the mine was totally abandoned and dangerous, making the whole trip feel like a huge risk for no real reward. Ryuji looks her right in the eyes and says he's going because he wants to bet on even the smallest possibility, which leaves Lean completely stunned. He knows there's a massive chance they'll come back empty-handed just like she said, but he's already made up his mind. He tells her that since they've prepared for the risks, he's decided the trip is worth it despite the danger. Lean takes a second to process that and realizes he's right. So as they stand before the dark entrance of the mine, she tells herself she's going to be useful and give this mission everything she's got. The inside of the mine is just as wrecked as they expected, with jagged rocks and debris everywhere since a goblin suddenly jumps out of the dark, eyes wide and teeth showing like it's been waiting for them. Lean completely loses it and lets out a yell, totally frozen by how fast the monster showed up. But Ryuji doesn't even flinch. He calmly calls for the power of the adamantite magic stone to kick in, and as more goblins leap from the shadows to attack, he steps in front of Lean to shield her. Lean tries to get a spell out but can't even finish her sentence before Ryuji's spark web catches the monsters, leaving the goblins stuck in place. Ryuji tells the magic to keep them pinned down so they can't get away, then he follows up immediately. He launches a freeze bullet spell that sends sharp shards of ice flying forward, and the attack hits with enough force to wreck the goblins instantly, clearing the area in one clean move. Lane just sits there staring at him. She says the whole display was just amazing. Ryuji helps her up and asks if she's okay. Lin says she's fine, just got caught off guard because he showed up so fast. Lin looks back at the wreckage and asks if that ice bullet was really a low-tier spell, because the power behind it was huge. Ryuji just smiles and tells her it's all thanks to the staff he's holding. So Lin gets curious and asks if it's some kind of crazy ancient relic or something, but Ryuji says it's nothing like that. He just imbued the gem on the staff with sage to boost his magic power. He notices the gem on Lin's staff and asks if she wants him to enchant hers too, which she totally jumps at. Lin agrees, but Ryuji says they should pick the actual enchantments later since those choices will pretty much decide their future. Moving on, they reach a spot where the cave tunnel splits into two different directions, and Lin checks the map and tells him that going straight leads right, but there's an open area if they head left. Ryuji stands there for a second, just thinking about which way they should go next. Lin nods and says she'll check things out, then casts a detection spell with her staff to see what's ahead. She looks over the results and tells Ryuji it looks like there are a whole lot of goblins waiting just to the left. Ryuji takes a second to process the news and starts to come up with a plan. So he looks toward the dark tunnel where the pack of goblins is hiding and confirms they're definitely heading left. Since they're already out here exploring, Ryuji suggests they just clear out the goblins and report the kills to the guild later. Lin's totally on board and says they should get going, powering up her magic as they move deeper into the cave. Eventually, they hit a wall and Lin points out that the map shows this spot is actually a dead end, but she still checks in with Ryuji to see if he found anything on his side. He just tells her there's nothing worth mentioning. Ryuji looks pretty bummed out, thinking to himself about how this specific spot turned out to be a total bust. He was really hoping his detection magic would turn something up despite the low yields lately, even if it wasn't a brand new or vein. Ryuji looks at the wall and wonders if he missed the mark, which catches Lin off guard, and he asks her what's wrong as she suddenly calls out his name, pointing toward a small crack in the cave wall where she can see light leaking out from the other side. Ryuji stares at the light and can't believe it, realizing they might have found something huge, but he worries that smashing through might cave the whole place in, so Lin tells him to just let her handle it. She closes her eyes and starts calling out to the spirits of the earth, focusing her mana into a spell, and the ground starts to rumble as the rock face begins to pull apart and open up for them. Ryuji tells her she did a great job, while Lin explains she just loosened the soil where that light was coming through. Lin looks into the new opening and asks Ryuji if this is really what it looks like, and he just nods. It turns out they found a hidden path that definitely wasn't here back when the mine was actually being worked. Ryuji guesses that a big earthquake probably opened up this new path that isn't on any of their maps, and Lin points out the soft clay on the walls as proof he's right. He tells her she did a great job, which just makes her giggle while the two of them start heading deeper into the dark cavern together. Lin mentions how amazing this new path feels, and Ryuji agrees, seeing as it's totally different from any of the tunnels they've walked through so far. There are glowing ores all over the place, which makes Ryuji think there's probably a huge undiscovered deposit waiting for them further in. Lin admits she's getting a little nervous about what they might find, but Ryuji jokes it would be funny if they found nothing, though Lin is determined to bring back good news for the guild. Lin yells out and covers her eyes as they walk into a part of the cave that's way brighter than the rest. It turns out the entire cavern is packed with glowing crystals, making the whole place light up. Ryuji stands there totally shocked by the scale of it all, so Lin asks him if he actually knew the find was going to be this massive when he said it was worth the risk. Ryuji admits that he definitely didn't expect results like this, and he realizes the haul is way bigger than he thought, even thinking they might get a bonus from the merchant guild. Lin is just staring at everything in awe, saying how beautiful it is while Ryuji kneels down to get a better look at the deposits on the floor, and he can tell right away that the quality of the ore is top tier. The scale of this vein is so big that once word gets out about the area being rediscovered, the whole city will feel the impact. It looks like things are about to change for the city, since the supply of magic stones from Southstead might finally start back up. Lin notices something else and calls out to Ryuji, pointing out that the cave path actually keeps going even deeper. Ryuji looks over and sees she's right, and they both realize how huge this place really is. Lin looks back at him and asks if they should keep moving forward to see what else they can find, but Ryuji thinks they've already gotten enough for one day. He tells her they should stop there because the risk of a cave-in is getting way too high. Lin agrees and suggests they head back now, maybe just checking for other spots like this as they go. Ryuji starts to say that sounds like a good idea, but he gets cut off mid-sentence by something. He grabs Lin's arm and yells her name, and she's caught totally off guard as he pulls her back. A huge rock smashes the wall, but Ryuji pulls Lin away just in time. Lean stands there shaking, trying to process what just happened as she realizes a giant boulder nearly crushed them. Ryuji quickly turns back to check on Lean, asking her if she's doing okay and making sure she isn't hurt. He thinks back to how he gave her an adamant magic stone earlier as a backup, but it's clear now that when a giant boulder comes flying in with that much force, even a stone that's hard as a diamond is pretty much useless. Normally Lean would have heard something like that coming, but Ryuji wonders if the weird echoes in the mine made her think the sound was further off. He stops worrying about the noise for a second because something else is way more important right now. A massive foot steps out with clear hostility. Someone definitely threw that rock on purpose to take them out. Lean looks up and sees this huge, muscular chest right in front of her, and she can't even find the words to react. Ryuji just glares at the thing and tells it that it's finally showed itself. A giant, ripped goblin stands over them looking ready to wreck everything in its path. Ryuji guesses it must be a goblin hero, while Lean stands there asking if this guy is the boss of the whole pack. Ryuji turns to Lean and tells her he needs her staff right now, which catches her completely off guard as she tries to figure out what he's doing. She asks if he's actually serious about fighting that thing, warning him that their opponent is probably a rank 2 monster or even higher. Ryuji just tells her he already knows that and makes it clear he's leaving all the support magic to her, looking at the monster. It's obvious that this guy isn't like the normal ones they've seen before. Ryuji draws his daggers and says they can't just stay quiet, because the monster definitely isn't going to let them leave without a fight. He drops into a low stance and tells Lean again that the support is all on her, since it's clear the beast has no intention of letting them walk away from this encounter in one piece. Suddenly, a bunch of smaller goblins come rushing out of the shadows to back up their leader, and Lean starts blasting them with magic, but she gets frustrated because there are just way too many of them showing up. Ryuji tells her he's sorry, but she has to keep holding them off until they deal with the big guy, while Lean points out they're just doing the same thing over and over. Lean watches as more enemies swarm in, realizing that while high-rank monsters usually have minions, this is getting out of hand. Ryuji can tell just by looking at the thing that they're dealing with something way stronger than a normal boss, and it's proving to be a nightmare to fight. Even after hitting it over and over with a dagger enchanted for extra sharpness, he still can't leave a single scratch. He thinks about just using a magic stone to blow the whole place to pieces, but realizes that would just cause a cave-in and kill them both. Even though they've managed to take out some of the smaller goblins, Ryuji knows they're just playing a losing game at this rate. Suddenly, the monster lets out a massive surge of energy that catches him completely off guard. Looking at the raw power the beast is putting off, it's pretty clear his diamond enchantment won't be able to hold up against an attack like that, so he decides he can't let this fight drag on any longer. He just needs to find a way to stop the monster's movement for even a split second. He notices the rock in his hand is already starting to crack under the pressure of his magic, meaning he has to move now. He steps up and puts everything into a whirlwind enchant to try and finish this. The distraction hits the monster hard, making it roar out in pain. Ryuji watches the opening he created, saying that should be enough to buy them some time. He yells for Lean to take her chance right now, and she quickly answers that she's on it. Lean starts charging up her power, telling the mana to gather around her and pierce the enemy. She screams out for her lightning spell to hit, and a massive blast of white light fills the room. Ryuji looks at the smoke, thinking that along with all the surrounding goblins, that hit must have finished it. But as the dust clears, the monster is still standing there with a creepy grin on its face. Lean is completely shocked, barely able to believe that her strongest attack didn't even leave a scratch. Ryuji looks closer and notices the necklace around its neck is actually imbued with magic resistance, which makes him realize magic is totally pointless here, and it's exactly why his dagger enchantment failed before. Ryuji says he's out of luck too, since he was hoping a potion would work if his magic failed, but Lean admits all she has left are some poisons and explosives, so Ryuji thinks about how he should have brought a freezing potion if he'd known it would be like this, and Lean asks if he really thinks a potion could have frozen it solid. Ryuji realizes they still have one last move they can try, especially since he sees a cloud of dust further back and has a hunch that if Lean uses her soil-loosening magic to pin the monster down, they can stop its movement and just run past it to get deeper into the room. Lean says she can do it, but she asks where they're even going and worries about what happens if they just run into a dead end. Ryuji tells her it'll be fine, even as the massive monster stands over them ready to strike. He tells her to trust him, giving her a confident look and reminding her that they're in this together. Lean takes a breath and says she's putting all her trust in him, and then she calls on the spirits of the earth, focusing her power to loosen the ground right beneath the goblin's feet, trapping the huge monster in a mud snare that keeps it from moving. Ryuji gives a confident smirk as he gets ready. While Lean puts everything she has into her next move, he tosses a small object straight at the massive monster while it's still stuck in the mud. Ryuji shouts for Lean to move, catching her completely off guard as he suddenly grabs her. Lean calls his name in confusion, but Ryuji doesn't slow down, telling her they just need to run for it. And then a massive flash of ice goes off, making the monster scream about freezing to death as the cold takes over. Lean finally slows her pace, letting out a long sigh of relief now that the danger is behind them. Walking out into the fresh air, Lean realizes there was another entrance right there, and Ryuji just smiles, saying he knew it. He explains he felt a breeze blowing inside the cave earlier and had a hunch his intuition would be right. But Lean is still curious about how they got away, asking him what that magic stone he threw actually was. Ryuji tells her it was a frigid magic stone, reminding her it was one of the items he showed her on their way to Southstead. Ryuji shows off the dark stones, explaining they can freeze anything nearby with a burst of cold. But Lean is pretty confused, since she thought magic didn't work on goblin heroes because of their necklaces. Ryuji tells her she's probably just misunderstanding how enchantment actually works, which surprises her. He explains that even though enchantment is magic, it really just uses the laws of nature unlike regular magic that comes from inside a person, making it more like a technique that pulls from the world. Lean realizes it sounds a lot like alchemy, and Ryuji tells her she's spot on with that idea. He decides it's time to head back in, but Lean worries that the freezing cold is still going to be lingering, so he pulls out a heatwave magic stone, noting the cold is probably already starting to fade anyway. He says once they confirm the boss is dead, they'll just use the stone to clear the air so they can get moving. Lean just stares, amazed that he carries as many useful tools as an actual alchemist. Ryuji looks over the scene and notes that the enemies are frozen solid. Lean just stares, saying she didn't expect the tool to be that powerful. Ryuji kneels down and suggests they start harvesting the magic cores from the boss and the other goblins, since those cores are basically the most valuable part. And once they finish up, he tells her they should head back to the guild while finishing the mind map like they planned. Lean tells him she's ready, making their way back to town, until Lean finally pushes open the guild doors and announces that they're back. Anne looks up from the counter and gives them a warm welcome, greeting both Ryuji and Lean as they walk in. She mentions she knew they were heading out to the burn mine and asks if they actually had any luck while they were out there. So Ryuji gives her a smirk and says it went perfectly, mentioning they even found a brand new vein of ore. Anne is totally caught off guard by the news, but Lean doesn't slow down. She holds up the finished map and starts explaining everything, while Ryuji pulls out a massive bag, telling the receptionist that these are all the magic cores they managed to pull out of the mine. Anne's jaw drops at the size of the haul. She asks if they ran into hobgoblins, since those cores are way bigger than normal. Ryuji adds that it wasn't just a normal run, there was actually a goblin hero down there, making Anne completely freeze up. She just stares at them, asking for a bit of clarification since she can't believe her ears, so she rubs her head and asks them to give her a second to process the whole thing. She starts listing it out. They found a brand new vein and took out a goblin hero. But she's not the only one listening, as the other adventurers in the hall start whispering, asking each other if they really just heard about a new ore discovery. The crowd starts buzzing, with people ignoring the ore to freak out over the goblin hero's magic core and wondering if these two really did it alone. The whole guild turns their way and everyone starts losing it, telling Ryuji and Lean that they're absolutely amazing for pulling that off. One guy shouts that a new vein might actually bring the town back to life, while someone else mentions how crazy it is that they cleared those monsters, leaving the two of them standing there together, just soaking in the praise from the crowd. Anne finally pulls herself together. She takes a breath and says she'll officially accept the map and the bag of cores as their finished job. Anne explains that because the stuff they brought in is so rare, it's technically outside their normal rules, so the guild has to do a full review of everything before they can pay out. Lean's cool with waiting, and Ryuji agrees that the plan works just fine, but Anne points out another issue. If they're getting paid as a group, they still haven't actually registered an official party name yet. Ryuji looks pretty surprised and admits he completely forgot since they've been running around being so busy lately, so he turns to Lean and asks if she has any good ideas. She puts a hand to her chin and starts thinking about it for a second, then her eyes light up like she just figured out the perfect thing. She suggests a name and explains it's an old word that translates to artisans in the ancient language, which seems to be the winner. Anne slides the paperwork across the counter and lets them know all the official procedures are finally finished. Ryuji thanks her for all the help and says he's sorry for making things so complicated for her today, though Anne just smiles and tells them it's no problem at all, thanking them instead for the massive contribution they just made to the town. Anne tells them that looking at the guild members right now, this could be exactly what Southstead needs to get its old energy back. And Lean smiles, saying she's really happy to hear that as everyone in the room starts treating them like the heroes who just saved the city. People are shouting from all over about how they're counting on the duo from now on. So Anne gives them one last warm smile and says the guild has really high hopes for whatever they decide to do next. It's clear the two from Altina have made a massive name for themselves already, standing there like they're finally ready to take on the world as a real team. Once they're outside, Ryuji suggests calling it a night and asks what the plan is for the next day. Lean mentions she really needs to stock up on some ingredients soon, and Ryuji agrees, saying they can just head to the market first thing in the morning, but he gets cut off by a sudden loud scream nearby. A girl suddenly appears out of nowhere, pointing right at them and yelling that she finally found him. Ryuji doesn't even look surprised. He just casually greets Minori and tells her she did a good job making it through such a long trip to find them. Minori isn't having it though, and she immediately starts complaining about how he just left a letter and vanished without saying a word to anyone. Ryuji asks where Suzu is and if she stayed with Minori, but Minori says the girl had some stuff to handle and would be joining them later on. Minori puts the pieces together and realizes that the alchemist Ryuji wrote about in his letter was actually Lane. Ryuji is surprised they know each other, so Lean explains that they actually worked on a quest together a while back. Lean brings up how things changed once Marie joined that top-tier guild, and Minori admits she had a bad feeling about that whole situation. Minori tells her it sounds like she went through a lot, but Lean just laughs it off like it's no big deal now. She explains she's doing great because she's finally focused on a new goal, and it's all because Ryuji stepped up to help her. Minori just watches her and says she sees how it is, taking in the new vibe between them as she suddenly remembers something she meant to tell her brother earlier. She tells him that since she got to town, she actually ran into some other people who were looking for him. Two adventurers show up right then, and Minori recognizes them as the same ones who were getting jumped back in the forest. Lady Sesai stands before the group and starts things off by apologizing for showing up so suddenly. Ryuji tells her it's fine, but he's definitely curious about what kind of business brought her all the way there. Diet addresses her as Lady Sesai to get her attention, and she simply confirms that he's right. Looking at Ryuji and Lean, she asks them to forgive her for being rude and not introducing herself properly the other day. She drops a massive bomb, explaining she's actually Kiseli Raiffeisen von Baystein, the first princess of the kingdom. The mood gets serious as she tells them she's there to ask a personal favor, which completely catches them off guard. Moving on, the group heads out to the fields to start gathering the materials they need for the task. Ryuji uses her nickname, Setsi, and tells her she really could have just stayed back and left the manual labor to them. She insists that as the client, she's not the type to just let others do all the work. But then Lena shouts out that she found something. The little girl holds up a huge basket full of plants, totally hyped about the big haul they just got. Ryuji tells Minori that her haul is pretty impressive, but reminds her to keep it down since this whole thing is a secret for the princess. The girl agrees to keep quiet, so Ryuji and Lean share a smile and decide it's time for them to get to work too. The scene shifts back to the workshop interior, where everything is quiet around the library and stairs. A fresh cup of tea is set down on the table, and the host tells the guest to go ahead and enjoy it. Setsi thanks them and mentions that since she's supposed to be incognito, everyone should just relax. Ryuji politely accepts the offer. Lean gets ready with her notes and addresses her as Lady Setsi, while Ryuji asks if they can finally talk about the details of her request. Deet tries to step in and offer to explain the situation to Ryuji instead, but Setsi stops him right there. She insists that since this is her personal request, she should be the one to tell them herself, leaving Deet with nothing to do but agree. Her expression turns a lot more serious as she tells the group that she needs to say something very important up front. She looks them dead in the eye and demands that they never repeat a single word of what they're about to discuss to anyone. Ryuji looks her straight in the eye and tells her he's got it. So he turns to the girls and asks if they're cool with this too. Minori says she'll give it her all, and Lean agrees right away. Setsi explains that the public doesn't know anything yet, but something happened a few days ago involving her father. Ryuji asks if she's talking about the king himself, and she confirms it's about him. Her face goes a bit dark as she tells them her father is stuck in bed right now because of this sickness. She goes on to explain that he just suddenly collapsed from it, which makes Lean realize what's going on and ask if this whole request is about making medicine. Ryuji nods and says that's exactly it. Setsi says they even had a top doctor back in the capital check him out, but even they couldn't figure out what the illness was. That's when she remembered the two of them and decided to come find them for help. So Ryuji takes it all in and tells her he finally understands what they're dealing with. Ryuji raises his hand to stop the conversation for a second. He calls out to Setsi because Lean feels like she doesn't deserve all that praise. But more importantly, she says she can't actually take the job without knowing the symptoms. So she asks Setsi to explain exactly what's going on with the king in as much detail as possible. Setsi looks down at her tea and starts going over everything that's been happening as Lean listens. She gets this look on her face like something just clicked in her head. Ryuji looks just as serious, while Minori stands there completely confused by whatever they're thinking. She finally asks if the two of them figured something out, and Ryuji just gives her a quiet nod before turning back to Setsi to tell her that her father isn't actually sick at all. Setsi nearly jumps out of her seat, asking him what he could possibly mean by that. So Ryuji makes it clear that everything she just described points to a curse rather than a normal illness. Ryuji explains that if she had taken her father to see a priest or an adventurer, they probably would have noticed the truth. But for a regular doctor, something like this is almost impossible to diagnose correctly. Setsi is completely stunned by the news, barely able to whisper the word curse as she processes it. She immediately starts apologizing for rushing them and wasting their time. She figures she needs to head to the church, but Lean stops her right there. Ryuji stands up and tells Setsi that if it's just a matter of breaking a curse, he can deal with it using his enchantment magic. Setsi just stares at him, totally confused about how enchantment magic is supposed to fix a curse. Ryuji keeps his cool and explains that the curse someone put on the king isn't actually that powerful, so they should be able to wipe it out easily as long as they have a dispel magic stone. He admits he doesn't have any of the stones on him at the moment, which means he'll have to sit down and craft a new batch. Setsi looks at him with a mix of hope and worry, asking how long it's going to take to get them finished. Ryuji looks over the local plants and says he can probably find all the ingredients he needs in the forest out back, so he asks Setsi if she can wait until tomorrow. She stays quiet, her hand clenching her dress as she holds back her emotions. She looks him in the eye and tells him she understands, and asks him to please go ahead with the plan. Later on, the group heads out to start gathering. Ryuji calls out to Renee to check how things are looking on her end, and she smiles back, saying she has a pretty good feeling about this spot too. She points out some boar droppings she found in the bushes and mentions they definitely belong to a slender boar. Setsi is totally floored, asking if Renee can really identify a monster just from that. Ryuji just laughs it off, saying that's just an elf's nose for you. Renee looks a bit grossed out and says she'd rather not smell it if she could help it, since having a nose this sharp is a total double-edged sword. Setsi gets curious and asks what kind of creature a slender boar actually is, so Ryuji explains that while they're large, they're pretty thin and mostly stick to the dark. They aren't usually a big threat, but they still need to keep their guard up. Lana agrees with the group and mentions that the boars might still be close, so they need to stay alert while they keep moving, standing by a cart loaded with supplies. Ryuji looks over the hall and asks if they finally have enough. Renee nods and says it looks good, especially since they grabbed enough extras to make sure they won't run out of materials for a long time. Diet notices some of the other stuff they picked up and asks if the clay they gathered earlier actually has a use too. And he explains that it's actually a key ingredient for high-end medicine, making him realize just how deep this alchemy stuff goes. Renee jumps in to add that while it's great for alchemy, even normal doctors use it, because it's perfect for settling a bad stomach. Diet hears that and immediately thinks it sounds like the perfect cure for Diet. Setsi chimes in, saying the guy is always complaining about his stomach hurting anyway, so they might as well let him try it. Diet reluctantly agrees she has a point, while Ryuji just stands there thinking about how much of a hard time Dietrich actually has. Lana looks at Ryuji and tells him he's really something else, but he just sounds exhausted when he asks if she's actually being serious. Lean suddenly stops the group, looking pretty worried as she tells everyone to just hold on a second. Ryuji asks her what's going on, and she explains that she can smell beasts and blood nearby, pointing over toward the tall grass. She says whatever she's smelling is coming from deep in those bushes. The group finds a dead animal on the ground, and someone asks if it's one of those slender boars. Lean looks at the body and confirms it's a carcass, but something about the way it died looks off. Looking at the marks on the body, someone notes it was a big animal, probably a bear that did this. Lana seems a bit shaken by the idea of a bear being around, but Ryuji says the whole thing is actually really strange. He looks at the body and points out that the boar carcass is way too clean for a typical predator, explaining that if a bear really did kill it, the thing should have been eaten way more than it was. Lana looks at him as the realization hits, asking if that means there's something else out there. Lean agrees with the idea, mentioning that if the predator was still busy eating, things would be different, but Dietrich steps up and throws his shield forward, asking if a bear is really what they're dealing with. The girls are totally grossed out by the scene in front of them, and Lana can't even help but groan at the sight. Ryuji just looks on, realizing that things are about to get pretty serious, because standing right there is a monster that is absolutely massive, towering over the whole group. Minori doesn't wait around and jumps straight into the action, swinging her sword at the beast, but she's completely shocked when her blade doesn't even leave a scratch, calling out how tough the thing is. Watching from the side, Ryuji can't believe his eyes, wondering how Minori's hit could have possibly failed. Minori knows that if this was just some normal wild animal, she would have taken its arm off in one shot, standing her ground alongside Ryuji. She's left wondering what's actually going on with this monster. Ryuji catches a glimpse of the beast up close, those glowing eyes, and the gem on its chest make it clear that this isn't some normal predator. So Ryuji quickly tells Lady Cecil to stay back while he moves to protect her. Looking at the massive shadow, Ryuji identifies the monster as a chimera kuma, which is bad news because a chimera is basically a bunch of different animals all mashed into one single body. And these things are created using alchemy just to boost their stats and turn them into living weapons. Ryuji knows that in any civilized country, these monsters are supposed to be kept under strict control. But he's stuck wondering what kind of idiot would actually let something this dangerous just run loose in the woods. Lady Cecil isn't about to hide though. She says she's not going to just stand there and let everyone protect her. So she turns to Lean and asks if she can sync up an attack with her, and Lean is totally down for it. Lean starts charging up her magic, calling for the mana to gather so she can blast right through that bear. Lady Cecil doesn't hold back, calling out for her flame arrow to blaze right in that bear's face. While Lean charges up her lightning, the two of them let their spells fly at the same time. The magic connects and the bear lets out a huge roar, making Ryuji think they landed a direct hit, but he realizes something is off immediately and knows it wasn't enough. The chimera is still standing because it's got magical defenses, meaning neither of their attacks did a thing. Ryuji stands there for a second trying to figure out what their next move should be, then Lean calls his name to get his attention away from the monster for a moment. She tells him she's actually got an idea, though she seems a little unsure about it, so Ryuji looks her in the eye and tells her they should just go for it and give it a try. He turns to Dietrich and asks if he can buy them some time for an enchantment, and the guy just tells Ryuji to leave it all to him. Lady Cecil takes charge, telling Minori to target the monster's back legs to keep it from moving, and Lean quickly lets her know she's ready. Ryuji finishes up his work, saying the sharpness enchantment is good to go, and he tells the team he's counting on them to handle the rest. Minori jumps into the thick of it, calling out to Dietrich that she's switching in for the next attack, and she lets out a shout as she swings her blade right at the chimera's legs. The monster is caught off guard, letting out a weird roar as the enchanted blade cuts deep, making the massive beast stumble and lose its balance as it struggles to stay standing. Seeing the opening, Ryuji calls out to Lean and tosses her a special item for their plan. Lean catches it perfectly, giving Ryuji a quick thank you before she gets to work, and she immediately yells for Minori and Dietrich to clear out of the way. She lets her secret weapon fly, a whirlwind-imbued Molotov cocktail that explodes, trapping the chimera in a massive storm of fire. Dietrich and Lady Cess stand back in awe of the blast. Dietrich asks what that power even was, looking totally stunned while Ryuji thinks back to the whirlwind explosive he used before. He'd held back then to keep things safe. But this time Lean explains that the enchantment on the one she just tossed was different. It was specialized just to make the explosion as big as possible. Ryuji watches the smoke, thinking that even if it didn't take the monster out, it should have been enough to stop it in its tracks. So he pulls out a magic sealing stone and says this next move is going to be the finisher. Suddenly, a thick slime bubbles up and wraps right around the monster's head, leaving the beast completely confused as it struggles to breathe. Lady Cess can't believe her eyes. She asks if that thing is actually a slime, and Lean tells her Ryuji showed her one of those stones before. She remembered him saying it could trap monsters inside a slime like that. Ryuji tells Lean that was a clever idea, because no matter how much a monster can tank physical hits or magic, it's all over once their nose and mouth are covered up, leaving the massive beast totally defeated on the ground. Ryuji looks at the magic core they just pulled out and wonders what that monster actually was thinking. Maybe some random alchemist put it together, or someone just got their hands on a synthetic core and decided to test it out on a bear to see if it worked. Ryuji tells the group they definitely need to report all this to the guild, but he realizes he's got to focus on making the dispel stone and doesn't really have the time for a trip there, leaving him groaning while Lean just starts laughing at how stressed he looks. Lean asks if she should just go instead since she knows he wants to get the stone finished fast, pointing out she has to drop off her transfer notice in Southstead anyway, so she can take adamant and handle the report. Ryuji tells her he's sorry for the trouble, but that would be a massive help for him, while Dietrich turns his focus back to Lady Tsetsi to figure out their next move. Ryuji suggests they just leave the bear carcass for Minori to deal with, and head back to the workshop planning to get started on crafting those magic stones immediately. Once they're back at the house, Lean looks over all the gear and tells Ryuji that everything is set and the preparations are finally done. Ryuji nods and says they're good to go, asking her if she's ready to jump right into it, since it's finally time for the alchemist and the enchanter to team up. He holds up a large stone and says this is the moment to show off their skills as real craftsmen. The workshop is totally quiet while they prepare to put in the work. Ryuji checks the supplies and mentions they've got plenty of materials, so they should be finished by tonight, turning to Riani to tell her it's officially time for them to show what they can really do. Lean just gives him a big smile and says she's ready. Thor looks over at the rock in Ryuji's hand and asks if that's the actual stone used to make magic stones, and Ryuji confirms it, explaining that this raw material is called a null magic stone. He starts explaining the process, saying you have to use a special knife to cut out the blank stone, then you apply heat using a catalyst to fill the whole thing with power. Next, they have to use a whetstone to get the rough shape of the stone just right, before finishing it off with a polish to fine-tune the edges and really bring out that magic luster. Ryuji points out that once all those steps are done, it becomes a seriously powerful magic stone. Thor listens closely and says he follows what Ryuji is saying, but he admits he's still got a question about how the enchanting works after the cutting is done, asking if the polishing stage is even needed, since the stone should be ready after the cutting and shaping is finished. Ryuji explains that if you skip polishing the stone at the very end, it won't ever reach its full potential. He says every step is what builds the stone's perfection, so they can't afford to cut any corners during the process, adding that this is especially true for stones made to save lives, just like the Dispel magic stone he's working on, because that's where an enchanter's actual skill level really shows through. He explains that artisans are always pushing themselves, trying to see just how much power they can pack into one stone, until he finally finishes the prep work and decides that everything looks good to go. Next, he lays out the catalyst plants and the cut stone onto a heat-resistant dish, and tells Thor that he just needs to apply a bit of heat right here to start the reaction. The magic takes hold and the leaves shrivel as the stone drinks in the energy. Thor looks on in total disbelief, pointing out that the catalyst plant has already withered away. Ryuji looks at the stone and says they've successfully filled it with power. Now they just have to do the cutting, shaping, and final polishing to get it ready. Once that's settled, he turns his attention toward Lean, explaining that he plans to enchant the bottle at the very end of the process, so he asks her to give him a heads up once the potion itself is finished. Lean smiles and says she understands, ready to get to her part of the job. Ryuji walks over to check on her station and asks what she's working on. Lean looks up from her tools and tells him she's brewing a stamina recovery potion. She points out that even if the magic stone manages to break the king's curse, it won't do anything for the exhaustion and weakness that's been dragging him down all this time. She figures some actual medicine is the best way to help him bounce back from all that physical strain, and Lady Sesai notices the ingredients, mentioning that it looks like a really strong medicine made from gnarly grass. Ryuji recognizes the name and asks if that's the herb known for boosting nourishment and vitality. Lean confirms he's right and starts walking through her recipe, explaining how she grinds the herb into powder, mixes it with distilled water, and finishes by straining it all out. Lean explains how she'll use alchemy to adjust the liquid she just strained, and if she distills it at the right temperature, she'll have the stamina potion ready. Ryuji mentions that knowing it's just made from herbs he's actually heard of makes the whole thing feel way safer to him. Lady Sesai chimes in to agree, pointing out that people even use those same herbs in tea sometimes. Ryuji then lets everyone know that the next steps are going to take a while for both him and Lean, so he asks if they can hang out and wait. Lady Sesai tells him not to even worry about it since they're the ones asking for the favor, but Ryuji says he's actually hyped to see a master at work. As they get to their spots, Lady Sesai looks at both of them, bowing her head slightly and telling them she's really counting on them to pull this off. Ryuji and Lean give her a confident look and tell her to just leave everything to them, and then the two of them get straight to it. Ryuji starts carefully shaping the magic stone on his machine, while Lean keeps a close eye on her chemistry. They both stay completely locked in, with Ryuji focused on the stone and Lean making sure her brewing setup stays perfect for the potion. The long process is finally over, everything is officially complete. Lean looks over at Ryuji with a smile, telling him he did some really good work today, but she's still curious about the progress, asking how the potions are coming along. Ryuji says they're basically done, all that's left is for her to put the enchantment on the bottle. Ryuji nods, saying he understands the plan and makes sure to tell Lean she did a great job too. Lean brushes it off like it was no big deal, so Ryuji just tells her that's definitely reassuring to hear. Turning back to the others, Ryuji thanks them for being so patient. Lady Sesai looks surprised, while Diet steps up and asks if the job is actually finished. Ryuji holds up a small chest with a confident grin, letting them know that yes, it turned out perfect. Lady Sesai leans in to get a look at the Dispel magic stone, and she can't help but say how beautiful it is. Diet stands there smiling, totally agreeing that the stone looks amazing. This time around, the Dispel magic stone has been crafted into a complex 58-faceted polyhedron. Ryuji walks over, explaining that because of the symmetry and optical design, the stone captures light beautifully. He mentions he made it in a shape that makes magic stones work at their best, and standing by the window, he says the glow from the stone will definitely help. He promises it's going to cleanse the Majesty's curse for sure. He finishes explaining everything, wrapping up with the precautions for how to use it, telling them the stone is actually pretty simple to handle. All they have to do is pour some magic power into it, and it'll start working just like that. Lady Sesai nods, saying she understands how it works. Moving on, Ryuji brings out the medicine, telling them it'll work just fine if it's taken orally. Lin speaks up, explaining that since Ryuji put a recovery enchantment on it, the medicine's effects are boosted, and she can personally guarantee that this batch is going to be way more effective than the usual stuff. Lady Sesai looks like she's about to cry from relief. She just keeps thanking them over and over for all their help. Lin looks over at the group as the sun goes down, asking if they'd be okay with staying over again, pointing out that it's getting pretty late, and there's no way to know if those bandits might try something else. Lady Sesai thinks about it and agrees to take her up on the offer, but right as they're settling in, someone yells out for Ryuji and Minori practically collapses against the doorframe, looking like she's been through hell just to get there. Lin and the others just stand there in total shock, with Lin barely being able to say Minori's name, as the girl stumbles into the room and holds out a piece of paper with a shaking hand. Ryuji takes it from her, looking confused and asking if it's some kind of letter, while Minori stares at the paper, asking if the handwriting on the page belongs to Suzu. The note is messy and frantic, with the words, "Help me," written clearly enough to make anyone's blood run cold. A horse-drawn carriage speeds down the road, kicking up dust as the situation turns serious. Minori is curled up on the floor in pieces, sobbing that it's all her fault and she should have just waited to come with Suzu instead of leaving her behind. Lin tries to step in and comfort her, telling her she can't blame herself for how things turned out, but Ryuji just watches them, thinking about how Minori has been stuck in this state since last night while he realizes the real problem goes back even further. He thinks about how he was the one who decided to leave those two behind and head out of the city in the first place, so if anyone is responsible for this mess, it's him. He's the one who should really be taking the heat for what's happening. He thinks about how talented and experienced the three of them are, surviving so many battles that he figured they'd be completely fine on their own. He starts to wonder if he was just being way too naive to assume there wouldn't be a problem. But then it hits him that Minori was likely thinking the exact same thing he was. She trusted in their strength just as much, and that's the whole reason she decided it was okay for them to act separately. Looking at the situation now, it's clear that that letter represents a total disaster. Whatever is going on has officially spiraled way past anything they were prepared for. The letter from Suzu says she's truly sorry. Ryuji stares at it, realizing every sign points to things being way worse than they thought. He looks over at Minori, who's completely crushed. He knows she understands the danger too, which is exactly why she feels so much guilt. Since they have no idea what's actually happening to Suzu, Ryuji stands up and tells the group they have to move. They need to head out immediately. The letter was sent from a place called Bechmer, so Ryuji is betting that Suzu is still somewhere in that town. Ryuji starts feeling a bit bad about how he acted earlier. Everything happened so fast that he realizes he was actually pretty rude to Lady Sesai. Lady Sesai is actually being really cool about it though. She tells him if it's an emergency, he shouldn't worry about her and should just get going. She offers to get them some horses to speed things up, but Ryuji admits they don't know how to ride, so they'll just grab the first carriage in the morning. Lady Sesai nods and reaches into her cloak, telling him she understands and asks him to take something before he leaves. Ryuji looks at the fancy document she hands him and asks what it is. She explains it's a formal invitation with the royal seal on it. She tells him that since they're going to Bechmer anyway, she wants them to stop by the royal capital of Laudinger on their way back home. Lady Sesai explains that once they arrive at the capital, she's going to set up a formal event to officially thank Ryuji for everything. But suddenly Lin cuts in to grab Ryuji's attention, catching him completely off guard. He's clearly deep in thought about the trip when he notices how worried Lin looks and asks her what's going on. She doesn't say a word at first, but then she smiles and holds out a wrap she bought, telling Ryuji it's for him. He realizes he's been so stressed he forgot to eat, and after taking the food and apologizing for being out of it, Ryuji watches as Lin turns her focus toward Minori to see how she's doing. Minori is still curled up in the corner of the carriage. She just looks down and says she isn't hungry at all. Lin tries to be firm with her, pointing out that she won't be able to move or fight when things get serious if she doesn't keep her strength up. Ryuji backs her up and asks Minori if she remembers what their old teacher used to tell them back in the day, reminding her that Master always said that if you actually want to get something done, you have to take care of yourself by eating and sleeping well first. Minori finally gives in and says she gets it. She takes a bite of the food, knowing she needs to be ready for whatever is waiting for them. Minori takes a bite and says the food tastes salty, making Ryuji realize she's crying. He asks her about it as she sits there holding her meal. The carriage moves through the woods, and it turns out they're finally getting close to the border of the Kingdom of D. Ryuji agrees that the trip is going to take some time, while Lin peeks out the back, noting that reaching Bechmer is still a long way off. But then the driver suddenly shouts and pulls hard on the reins, desperately trying to bring the horses to a full stop. The carriage stops behind a crowd of people standing in the road. Everyone is confused, asking what's happening and what's blocking the way. It turns out there was a huge landslide that completely filled the mountain pass with giant boulders, making it impossible for wagons to pass through. The travelers talk among themselves, saying part of the western mountain collapsed and realizing there's no way they're getting through. One guy starts complaining that he has urgent business in D, demanding to know if anyone can actually do something about the blockade. Lean says this is a huge problem and asks Ryuji if they're going to be forced to walk the rest of the way from here. Ryuji says he'd rather she didn't have to do that, but Minori points out they definitely don't have time to just sit around and wait for the road to clear. Ryuji looks at the massive pile of boulders with a serious face and says they're just going to move the whole thing. Lean looks confused and asks if he's planning on carrying them by hand, but Ryuji says that's impossible even with a magic stone. He starts thinking about his skills. He's planning on using a different method to get the job done. As he walks toward the landslide, Ryuji tells her he's going to move the rocks to get them out of the way. Back in town, everything seems quiet around the party's home base, but that doesn't last long. Guy storms into the room and yells for Suzu, who's just trying to sit there and read her book. He looks completely annoyed and demands to know where the hell Minori went. Suzu doesn't even look up from her page, she just says she's busy reading a grimoire right now. She tells him he shouldn't just barge into her room like that, but Guy gets in her face and tells her to answer the damn question. Suzu explains that Minori left town yesterday and even she doesn't know where she went, then tells him to just get lost. Guy's face goes dark as he calls Suzu a little brat, asking her who the hell she thinks she is. He's clearly hit a breaking point, but Suzu doesn't back down. She tells him that's her line and mocks him for calling himself a leader when he and his crew basically just forced their way into her party to begin with. She isn't done yet, pointing out that Ryuji and Minori were the only ones actually keeping things together by constantly cleaning up his messes. She looks him right in the eye and says he's the one who needs a reality check for acting so high and mighty. That's the last straw for Guy, who finally snaps and swings his arm, violently knocking the book right out of her hands. Suzu's eyes go wide as she realizes what happened. She stammers out that the book was actually borrowed, but before she can even react, Guy follows through with a heavy blow, hitting her right across the face and drawing blood. He's completely lost it and grabs her by the collar, pulling her up close. He calls her a little shit and tells her not to get cocky with him, leaving Suzu groaning in pain, her face bruised and bloodied as she struggles to deal with his sudden violent outburst. Minori finally jumps in and yells at Guy to stop, telling him he really doesn't need to go this far. She's clearly scared out of her mind. But Guy just snaps back that everything is that damn brat's fault. He's not cooling down at all and demands to be taken exactly where Suzu and Minori are planning to go. He gets right in her face and tells her he hasn't even accepted their resignation yet, but Suzu manages to speak up through the pain, telling him that leaving a party is a personal choice and he can't stop them. She lets him know that she and Minori already turned their official paperwork into the guild, which just makes Guy give off this really creepy, dark vibe as he repeats her words back to her. He turns his attention over to Sean, who looks pretty confused about where this is all going. Guy orders him to go rent another room in the inn and keep torturing them until they spill everything they know, eventually telling Sean to bring them back to this room later. He's completely lost track of how much time has passed. Suzu is trapped in total darkness because every single door and window is locked tight. She can't even tell what's going on in the world outside, and sitting there with her hands tied makes everything worse. Her stomach starts growling pretty loud, and she realizes just how hungry she's getting as she remembers Master's old advice about making sure to eat and sleep right. It's a simple rule, but she's already beating herself up for breaking it again. She got way too into her grimoires and forgot to take care of herself, which is the only reason Guy's surprise attack actually worked. She knows if she had been at full strength, he never would have gotten the jump on her, but right now her body is just feeling weaker by the minute. She tells herself she has to make a move while she's still got enough energy to do something, so she looks over at the door, checking to see if anyone is watching or waiting on the other side. It's completely quiet out there. She doesn't hear a single sound coming from the hallway, which means this is her only chance to escape while the guards are gone. She starts focusing her mana, calling out for a spell to copy her own dying body, and just like that, the imitation magic kicks in. The room fills with light as the spell starts to take shape. Suzu knows her clones aren't great for anything that needs a delicate touch, but they're good enough to handle a letter. She managed to write one in secret without Guy or the rest of the party ever finding out, and now she's ordering her clone to get that message to Ryuji and Minori as fast as possible. The clone sprints down the hallway while Suzu waits back in the dark, worrying about whether the plan is actually going to work. She knows everything rests on whether her friends actually receive that letter, so 10 days pass since the group first headed out from Southstead. Back at the guild, Emin is standing with Anne, trying to figure out if some news he heard is actually legit, when Ryuji suddenly bursts into the room with Line and the others, shouting that he needs to ask Emin something right now. Anne and Emin are both pretty shocked to see him standing there after all this time, but Ryuji doesn't have time for small talk. He tells them they can catch up later and asks if they have any idea where Suzu is. Emin looks pretty stressed out as he hears the name Suzu, realizing the situation is getting heavy. He tells Ryuji that it definitely seems like something went wrong with her, and Ryuji just stands there, suddenly catching a glimpse of Sean hiding in the crowd. Ryuji looks completely floored to see him, but Sean realizes he's been made and immediately starts to panic, thinking he's in deep trouble now. Ryuji calls out his name and can tell just by the way the guy is acting that he's hiding something, so Emin steps in and tells Ryuji to follow him right away because he's got a lead on where they might be. He explains that a tip just came in about their location, leading the group down a quiet hallway while sharing the news that someone spotted Suzu and Sean leaving a room at the inn together. Emin makes it clear that the guild usually stays out of drama between adventurers if there isn't any proof, but the rules are totally different once the family gets involved, and he looks ready to settle this himself. Emin mentions he got the lowdown from the reception desk on how to play this tip-off, and he's certain Sean is mixed up in it after seeing how the guy panicked, so Ryuji looks pretty focused and says if that's how it is, they need to go and see what's actually going on for themselves, leading the group through the building until they stop at a specific spot. Emin stands in front of a wooden door and says he's pretty sure Suzu is being held captive right inside this room, and Ryuji immediately starts knocking, calling out to Suzu and telling her it's him, but he just stares at the door in silence when he realizes there isn't any response from the other side. One of his sisters comes running down the hall with a key, telling him she explained everything to the innkeeper to get them inside. Then she doesn't waste any time, sliding the key into the lock and turning it until it clicks open. Ryuji throws the door open and shouts her name, but the sight inside makes everyone freeze, showing Suzu sitting all by herself in the middle of the dark room, looking completely broken. The girls rush over to Suzu's side, and they frantically ask if she's doing okay while Lean takes a closer look and lets out a breath of relief, telling everyone that she's actually just sleeping. Ryuji's sister pulls Suzu into a tight hug. She starts crying and says she's so sorry for leaving her all alone, but Lean quickly explains that she's just really weak from everything, so she starts giving her some nutrients to help her recover. Suddenly, the door flies open and Guy yells at them. He calls them bastards and demands to know why they're barging into the room. Marie is standing right there behind him, and she's completely stunned to see Lean there. She can barely even say her name. Lean looks back over her shoulder and is just as shocked to see Marie standing in the doorway. Then Guy glares at the group with a look of pure hate. He asks Ryuji what the hell he's doing in his room and tells him to get out. Ryuji stands there with his head down, looking dark as he just says Guy's name under his breath, which makes Guy smirk and pull out his gear. He acts all tough and asks what's with the look Ryuji is giving him. Guy grips his sword and laughs, asking if a third-rate enchanter like Ryuji really thinks he can actually win this, but Ryuji just looks down and sighs, telling Guy that he's clearly still the type to judge everyone based on nothing but their rank. He stares Guy down and calls him a fake second class who can't even finish a job without magic stones, basically a guy who just acts big because of his size. Ryuji looks him right in the eye and tells him to stop yapping like a dog. Before things can get physical, the guildmaster Yimin steps right between them and tells them that's enough, and he gives Guy a cold look, warning him that if he causes another scene like this again, there will be consequences. Yimin then drops a bombshell, asking Guy if he forgot that Marie was actually demoted all the way down to 3rd class. Guy starts sweating and begs the guildmaster to wait, swearing it wasn't his fault and that Ryuji barging in caused everything. Yimin doesn't want to hear it and asks how he plans to explain Suzu's condition, which shuts Guy up instantly as Ryuji stands there looking ready to snap. He tells Yimin not to try and stop him because Guy is way past talk now. Yimin lets out a long sigh and rubs his forehead, realizing that looking at Ryuji and Guy, neither of them is going to listen to reason anymore, so he stops to think for a second before coming up with a plan, asking the two of them how they feel about a different way to settle it. While Guy and Ryuji stare each other down with pure hatred, the guildmaster tells them both to take their little fight outside, and he makes it official by declaring it a formal duel, adding that he'll be there to act as the witness for the whole thing. Meanwhile, Suzu finally starts to groan and wake up, feeling completely out of it as she slowly opens her eyes. Minori calls out her name in relief while Lean leans in close, asking if she's finally noticing what's going on around her since Suzu looks up at them with a blank stare, sounding pretty confused as she recognizes Minori and asks if that's actually Lean standing there. Lean says yeah, and Minori asks if Suzu remembers that job they all worked on together a while back, which Suzu says she does, but she's still totally lost and asks where they even are right now, so Lean explains they're at the training grounds behind the guild. Minori fills her in on the rest of the drama, explaining that because of the guildmaster's idea, Ryuji and Guy are actually about to duel. Lean watches from the sidelines, figuring that by having them settle this mess in public, the guild can keep anyone else from starting drama later. She knows if the promise is made during an official duel, even a guy like Guy won't be able to back out, so she's just hoping Ryuji wins so everything can finally be over with. Out in the center of the training grounds, Yimin stands between the two of them and says they need to go over the terms of the fight one more time. He explains that if Guy wins, Ryuji is banned from the city and the girls have to stay in the party, but if Ryuji comes out on top, Guy has to pay 500 gold for the trouble he caused, and he'll get dropped 2 ranks down to 4th class. Yimin looks at both of them and asks if they're actually clear on the conditions for this match. Both of them agree immediately, eyes locked on each other as the tension finally hits its limit, and then Guy loses it and charges in with his shield up, yelling at Ryuji to beg for his life while he still has the chance. Ryuji just stands his ground with this dark look in his eyes, telling Guy he's pathetic and mocking him about that demotion he's about to get. Emin raises his hand to get everyone's attention, signaling that it's finally time to start the show. The signal for the duel to begin rings out across the grounds, and while Guy looks ready to kill, Ryuji calmly says he's ending this with just his fists, so Emin cuts in one last time to make sure they both know exactly what they're signing up for. The air is thick with tension as the rules are repeated. If Guy wins, he keeps the girls in his party and Ryuji is gone for good. But if Ryuji takes it, Guy has to pay up 500 gold and face a massive demotion that would wreck his career. But Emin stares them both down, asking if they're absolutely sure about these conditions before they start swinging. Guy doesn't even hesitate, confirming that there's no mistake on his end as he prepares to charge. Ryuji is just as cold, simply stating that he agrees to everything without showing a hint of fear. Guy loses his mind and starts screaming, telling Ryuji that if he wants to beg for mercy, he better do it right now, but Ryuji just looks back with this dark, scary expression, telling Guy he's pathetic and he shouldn't cry too hard about his new rank. The signal finally goes off, and the duel officially kicks off as Guy charges into the arena, shield up and sword ready. Guy goes for a massive swing that misses and slams into the floor, but Ryuji just stands there watching him totally bored while Guy loses his cool and starts yelling, calling Ryuji a little brat and telling him to stop running away like a coward. Ryuji just tells him no, casually pointing out that he's not about to get hit by a sword because that would actually hurt. Then he starts talking down to him, saying Guy's movements are way too messy and he should try learning from Minori instead. Guy is absolutely fuming at the insult. He clicks his tongue and mutters about how much he really hates Ryuji's guts, but the crowd starts buzzing when they hear the stakes. Everyone's shocked that there are 500 gold coins on the line. People are whispering about how that's enough money to live like a total king for at least a year. But then Guy snaps at Emin, screaming that there is no way he's actually carrying that kind of cash around with him. Ryuji says he figured as much, but then he looks over at the rest of the party and asks if they have the money to pay up. Ryuji calls her out, mentioning how Marie is probably sitting on a big pile of savings, and Marie starts panicking immediately. She tells him to wait a second because there's no way she's doing that. Guy loses it and tells her to shut up. He says as long as he wins it's fine, so she needs to just hand it over. Emin steps in and tells Guy to hold on. He says Guy needs to show some class and actually ask to borrow it properly, warning him that if he doesn't, Emin won't even count that money as his for the bet. He goes on to say that if Guy can't follow Ryuji's rules, then the whole deal is off and his own conditions are trash. Guy realizes he's stuck, so he calls out to his teammates and bows his head, asking them to please lend him the money. Sean is just standing there in shock, but Marie gives in and says she'll do it, though she makes sure to tell him he better win in exchange for the cash, leaving Guy muttering to himself about how much this sucks. He gets back into a fighting stance, telling himself there's no way he loses to a weak enchanter like Ryuji. Ryuji watches the scene play out, thinking to himself that Guy fell for the bait and got mad just like he wanted. It makes all the effort he put into demanding those reparations and strict penalties feel worth it, especially since he knows it's finally time to get serious. He starts his chant, calling for a flame to pierce the guy in front of him and burn bright, officially launching his fire arrow spell, but Guy just stands there, letting the fire slam into his shield. Ryuji watches him closely, thinking it's weird because he didn't feel any real resistance when the spell hit. Guy just laughs it off, asking Ryuji if he honestly thought some low-level magic like that was going to do anything to him. He keeps the trash talk going, reminding Ryuji that he's still just a weak enchanter no matter what he tries, and tells him he's got a big mouth for someone who's still moving as slow as he always has. Ryuji doesn't look bothered at all. He just gives a little smile and suggests that Guy might want to take off that heavy-looking armor. Guy just clicks his tongue, clearly annoyed by the suggestion as the tension between them keeps building up. Guy loses his cool and tells Ryuji to shut up while swinging his sword with all his strength, But Ryuji is busy looking at his sublimation stone, thinking about how it's the only reason he's got this boost. Guy just scoffs at him, asking if that weak move was really all he had to show for himself. So Ryuji starts a new chant, calling for the mana to gather and turn into a bolt of lightning to hit the swordsman. He lets the lightning strike go, and the whole area lights up with a massive blast that Guy just charges straight through, screaming as he pushes through the smoke to close the gap. Ryuji just sighs, noticing there was no resistance at all when the spell hit, just like with his fire arrows. He gets a bad feeling and realizes the guy is definitely pulling some kind of trick, which is why he tells the truth to come out and triggers his appraisal skill to analyze exactly what's going on. A massive screen of data and status bars pops up over Guy, laying out all his secrets for Ryuji to see. Ryuji checks out Guy's gear and realizes that besides that sword, the dude doesn't have a single piece of magic equipment on him, meaning he isn't doing any of this on his own, and it hits him that Marie must be the one behind his magic failing this whole time. So he looks Guy straight in the face and asks him flat out if he's using anti-magic to cheat. Guy doesn't even have an answer. He just stands there sweating, looking totally busted while the crowd watches on, oblivious to Marie hiding nearby with a glowing device on her back. Emin steps up and calls Guy out, asking him if he really just went and ruined a sacred duel by playing dirty like that. Guy starts losing it, panicking and yelling that Ryuji is just making up lies to make him look bad, but Ryuji doesn't even care. He tells Emin it's fine and says they should just get back to the fight. He calls out Guy's name one last time as he gets ready to move, and before Guy can even react, Ryuji is right in his personal space, grabbing him and asking if he really had to cheat that hard just to take down someone he thinks is a total loser. Ryuji slams Guy down with enough force to make him choke, and looking him right in the eye, he tells Guy that without those buffs, he's not even second class. He keeps going, calling Guy nothing but a paper tiger with a massive ego while Guy starts to freak out internally, wondering how Ryuji has this much power to push him back. He's sweating bullets thinking about the 10 gold coins and the fact that he's about to lose 2 whole ranks, but he tries to tell himself that hitting the top rank would make that kind of money easy to get back. Guy refuses to accept getting demoted like this, so he tries to flip the script and shouts that Ryuji must be the one who's actually cheating. He screams that there's no way a useless enchanter who supposedly can't fight has this much strength, and Ryuji just decides it's time to set him straight, telling Guy he's been getting it wrong for a very long time. Guy starts yelling that he's an enchanter meant for the backline, but Ryuji reminds him he only said not to expect him to fight like a mage. He looks Guy dead in the eye and tells him he didn't say he couldn't fight, not even one single time. Ryuji explains it's actually pretty simple. Having an amateur mess around in a professional level fight just gets in the way, so it was just way more logical for him to play the dedicated support role for the party, and he tells Guy he shouldn't even have to think twice to realize that's the truth. He mentions Guy only saw him acting like a support, and just assumed he was weak trash the whole time. Guy lets out a scream as Ryuji swings his sword, sending him flying across the room, and as Guy hits the floor hard, Sean just stands there completely speechless. Everything goes south when a massive smoke bomb suddenly goes off, catching everyone in the room off guard. The whole place fills with a thick white haze as the others start coughing and asking what the hell is happening. Ryuji stands there totally calm in the middle of the mess, wondering if this smoke is just another one of Marie's annoying tricks. But then he realizes it's way too cheap for her, and that a dirty move like a smokescreen is definitely more of a Sean thing. Suddenly Guy charges right out of the mist, looking completely unhinged as he screams Ryuji's name and tells him to die. He puts everything into a massive swing that cuts through the air, but Ryuji just looks back like it's nothing. The two of them clash hard, but Ryuji is way faster and meets the attack with enough force to completely snap Guy's blade, leaving the guy staring in total shock as the tip of his sword flies away. Before he can even process that his weapon is trashed, Ryuji spins around and closes the distance, landing a heavy punch right to the jaw that leaves Guy making a choked-up sound as he gets absolutely leveled. The fight ends with an announcement declaring Ryuji the winner. Guy stays down on the ground, totally out of the match as everyone watches the aftermath. Suzu calls out to Ryuji while Minori and Lean stand close by, watching him kneel down to check on her. He apologizes to Suzu, saying he should have never left her behind in the first place, but she looks up at him and says it's okay. She's the one who decided to split up from Minori after everything happened. Ryuji just gives her a kind smile and tells her not to worry about any of that right now. Lean looks pretty shocked though, asking if that crazy strength he used to break the sword and land that kick came from a magic stone. Ryuji confirms it, saying he was using the Fural Stone, which is the same one he used back during the landslide. He holds up the crystal, explaining that this specific magic stone is the reason he could pull off those moves earlier. There's a catch where you have to be empty-handed to use it, but in return it gives a massive boost to physical stats. Turns out it's a super rare stone called a gift, which carries the divine protection of Fural, one of the old gods of war. Ryuji looks back on things and mentions the Pura stone he used before worked in a similar way, explaining that while these stones have crazy conditions like draining the soil or needing empty hands, the power they give is on a totally different level. Lean looks completely floored by the explanation, wondering if something with divine protection can even be called enchantment magic anymore. Minori turns her head and calls out to Guy, still referring to him as the leader, but he's out cold, so Sean just tosses him over his shoulder and carries him off. With the drama finally over, the group stands together on the path as Ryuji starts to wrap things up, mentioning they haven't had a second to breathe since finishing the duel paperwork back in Bessemer. He officially announces the formation of the Altina party, with the four of them standing ready, and suggests they should go find a spot to relax and blow off some steam since everyone's pretty worn out. Minori thinks that's a great idea, especially since they need to get cleaned up before making their way to the castle. Minori checks in on Suzu to make sure she's doing alright after everything that happened, and Suzu says she's fine, mentioning that Lean's medicine actually worked wonders for her. Lane holds up their official invite and suggests they make their way toward the castle town, which Ryuji thinks is a solid plan, so the whole group gets ready to move. They start making their way toward Laudinger, the royal capital, a massive new stage for them to explore now that they've come out on top. It's been 12 days since they first left Bessemer, and the long trip is finally ending, though Minori is definitely feeling the burn, admitting she's completely exhausted from all the walking. Lean tries to keep her spirits up, telling her sister to hang in there since they're almost at the finish line, and just then she spots the city and points it out with a huge smile. Ryuji looks completely blown away as they finally reach the end of their long trip, and there it is, the royal capital Rodinger, with its huge white towers stretching up into the sky. Once they get inside, the girls start trying on new clothes, and Lean tells Suzu she looks super cute, so Suzu admits she wanted to try something different, while Lean just loves her new fancy look. They stand outside the fitting room waiting on Minori, asking her how much longer she's gonna be, but Minori tells them to hold on, sounding totally freaked out about how embarrassing the skirt feels. She finally peeks her head out looking exhausted, while Ryuji just watches them all being high energy. He looks around the shop and realizes a guy like him really doesn't belong in a place like this, standing there sweating because he feels so out of place with all the women shopping around him. He eventually asks if he can just go hit up another shop alone since they're clearly gonna be a while. Lean shuts down Ryuji's idea of leaving immediately, telling him there's no way he's going anywhere, and Suzu joins in, pouting because Ryuji won't even help them pick out any of the clothes they're trying on. Minori just looks at him like he's hopeless, calling him a total blockhead for being so dense about it. Later at the inn, Suzu tells Ryuji he needs to toughen up because he can't be getting tired this easily, while Ryuji sits there thinking about how girls take a crazy amount of time just to buy a few things, admitting to Lean over their meal that the whole experience really drained the life out of him. The shopping trip ended up dragging on for 3 entire hours, and the second Ryuji complained, all 3 girls turned on him, saying it's his own fault for giving such lazy feedback on their outfits. Ryuji drinks his beer thinking about how unfair that is, but then Lean brings up their plans for tomorrow. She says the alterations will be done by morning, so they should dress up before heading to Lady Cease's. Ryuji agrees to the plan, figuring it's best to dress up before they head over to Lady Cease's place. And back at the table, Suzu tells Lean the food is amazing and that she really needs to try some, which Lean is happy to hear, though Minori seems to have something else on her mind. Watching them, Ryuji realizes the number of women in his life is growing, and they're all starting to get way too organized, making him seriously wonder if he's even going to survive being the only guy. But his thoughts get cut off when he overhears some guys talking about how the port in Southstead needs to be fixed so trade can get back to normal, which immediately catches Ryuji's attention. He looks over at the table behind him, trying to figure out if the guy talking is actually a merchant, as the man explains that a massive resource vein was found in the old burn mine, and a port would bring the whole area back to life, instead of letting such a valuable mine just sit there and go to waste. The man at the table keeps talking, mentioning that even though Marquis Reichner wants to fix the port, it's not happening because the king is too busy prepping the northeast for a potential invasion from Guan, leaving the people in the city wishing they could just focus on developing the Marquis' land instead. Listening in, Ryuji realizes that news about the mine has reached just about everyone by now, and after thinking it over, he figures out the biggest hurdle they're facing is actually the distribution, which makes some of the local claims about owning or making mines look like a complete mess. Later, the group heads to the palace where a guard checks their papers and confirms their introduction, welcoming Ryuji, Lane, Suzu, and Minori as the party Altina before telling them to come right in. They follow the guard through the long, arched hallways of the estate, where they run into a massive, shirtless guy who wants to know if they're the guests. The guard snaps into a salute and shouts out his confirmation, as the guard explains that Ryuji and Lean are the ones who came up with the healing potions and dispel stones. The massive guy from before suddenly realizes who they are and gets pretty hyped, introducing himself as Jorg Rochefort Bastein, and casually dropping the fact that he's the king of the nation. The whole group just stands there completely frozen while Suzu barely manages to stutter out a greeting. Ryuji tries to keep it professional by introducing himself as an enchanter, but the king just waves it off, telling everyone to relax because there's really no need for them to be so formal around him. He gives them a small smile and points out that after everything, they're basically the ones who saved his life. But Ryuji just looks down, feeling like it's going to be impossible for them to just act normal, leaving the king just sighing and repeating that he honestly wants them to drop the act and stop being so stiff. Suzu stands there looking like she's completely lost it, thinking that the king's kind words are just totally wasted on them, while Minori starts sweating bullets, reminding Suzu that they've never actually had to talk to a world leader before. Ryuji is just as stressed, admitting that none of them have any idea how to act or what the proper rules are for a situation like this. But he decides to just go for it and asks the king how his health has been lately. King Jorg gives a small grunt and tells them they have his absolute thanks for everything, explaining that the curse is gone and the medicine worked so well he's actually got more energy than he can handle. He says that's the whole reason he's been out here training so hard with his sword, right as a knight yells out for him, relieved to finally find where the king was hanging out. Jorg turns and tells the knight, Gotthard, that he showed up just in time to meet the ones behind the magic stones they were talking about, which leaves Gotthard looking at Ryuji and Lean, finally putting the pieces together that they're the ones who made it all happen. Gotthard stands tall and introduces himself by his full name, explaining that he's actually the Grand Master of the Knights, and he mentions that he heard some of his younger recruits were in their care a while back. Lean looks pretty surprised that he knows about that, getting all flustered as she tries to play it down, saying she only did what felt natural at the time. Gotthard doesn't let it go though, telling them that between helping the recruits and what they did for the king, he has to thank them for the whole Knight Order. King Jorg decides they've talked enough out in the sun, saying he can't keep his guests just standing around forever, so he calls over a guard and tells him to lead everyone to the drawing room. The knight salutes and gets right on it, while Jorg lets them know he's going to send Setsi over to see them immediately. Everyone heads inside to wait in the fancy lounge, and then Setsi finally shows up, walking through the door and thanking them all for being so patient. She smiles and says it's been a long time since they last saw each other, which finally lets the group relax now that they're with a friend. Setsi looks over and asks if she's Suzu, and Ryuji speaks up to introduce her as their youngest sister. Setsi looks at the group with a warm smile and tells Suzu she's really happy to see that she made it back safely, which catches Suzu off guard for a second. She quickly finds her voice and thanks the princess for the kind word. Setsi acknowledges that the trip must have been exhausting for everyone, looking over the group, as she gestures toward the comfortable couches in the room, inviting them all to finally take a seat and relax. Once everyone gets settled in, Setsi mentions that they have plenty of things to catch up on, but she wants to handle business first, reaching down to pull out a heavy bag and telling them she's got the rest of their reward ready. Ryuji takes the bag and asks the others to check the contents, while Lean just stares at the pile of gold like she can't believe it's real. Ryuji tries to keep things professional, starting a sentence by addressing her as Your Highness with all due respect, but Setsi stops him right there, looking him in the eye and insisting that he just calls her by her name. Ryuji realizes she isn't going to let the formal stuff slide, so he gives in and calls her Lady Setsi, finally letting the mood settle. Setsi gives him a big, bright smile and just says yes, which leaves Ryuji looking pretty confused about the whole thing. Ryuji looks down at the pile of gold and asks what's going on, pointing out that there's way more here than the amount they talked about earlier. Setsi just smiles and confirms that she definitely added a little extra on top of the original price, and she reminds him that while her first request was only for them to make a dispel magic stone, that stone ended up working even better than she expected. She goes on to say that she's also paying extra because the two of them were actually kind enough to go out of their way and provide medicine for her father's health. She explains that because of those reasons, this extra money isn't just some random bonus, and she honestly thinks the high price is totally fair for the level of help they gave her family. Setsi adds that her father has been way more energetic lately, but it turns out that's actually making him a bit of a handful for the people around him. Setsi looks down and mentions she's got a message from her dad. Apparently he wants to thank them personally, and that's totally separate from the gold reward. She says sorry for the extra trouble, but she needs them to head over to the audience chamber a little later, while Ryuji looks at the bag of gold in his hands, thinking that this money alone is already way more than they deserved for the job. Setsi sits with the group and reassures everyone that what they managed to pull off is actually a really big deal, leading to the two of them standing in the massive throne room later on, where the king tells them they should stand tall and be proud of what they did. The king sits on his throne and tells them to raise their heads, so Ryuji the enchanter and Lin the alchemist stay kneeling as they're officially addressed by the crown. He starts thanking them specifically for making that dispel stone and the stamina potion, mentioning that the whole thing was honestly a huge, difficult mess for him to deal with. Ryuji quickly agrees while Lin bows her head even lower, telling the king that he's being way too humble about everything. Ryuji looks down, feeling pretty awkward because he just tripped over his words in front of the king. Lin is just as bad, looking totally flustered and thinking she completely messed up the greeting, but the king doesn't seem to mind, saying his daughter already paid them, but he still wants to say thanks himself. Ryuji tries to stay calm while the king tells them to name a request if they have one, making the group pause for a second in the middle of the massive room as they process the offer. Setsi smiles and confirms that her father really did mean for both of them to ask for something, explaining that he's willing to grant pretty much any wish they might have right now. Lin starts thinking about it but gets overwhelmed, saying only small things come to mind and she's got no clue what to ask a king. She looks over and asks if Ryuji has anything in mind, and he looks back with a serious face and says he does. He stands up and addresses Lady Seti directly, telling her there's actually one thing he really wants to ask for. Setsi listens to Ryuji and nods, saying she understands. She tells him she doesn't think there should be any real problem with him making a request to the king, but she looks a little nervous as she trails off, clearly wondering just how far he's planning to go with this. Ryuji stays kneeling and explains that, in his mind, it really just comes down to a question of how much they can actually get done. So he decides to be bold and tells them he has one specific request he'd like to put on the table. He gets straight to the point, saying his request is about the restoration of the port of Southstead over in Reichner, and he looks right at the king, finishing by saying he'd like to ask for the crown's full support to make it happen. The king's eyes narrow slightly as he lets out a small sound of interest, taking in the scale of what the kid just asked for. Just then, a grunt comes from the side of the room as a man standing near the throne makes his annoyance known, and it's Gotthard, who says he never thought he'd see common people trying to stick their noses into matters of the state like this. Ryuji catches the comment and looks over, sweating a bit as he wonders who this guy is and why he's so bothered. King Jorg shuts down Elmer's attitude, telling him that some things can only be understood by commoners. Elmer doesn't back down, arguing that as Prime Minister, he sees things differently, and Ryuji starts sweating as the realization hits him. The grumpy old man is actually the guy running the country's government, and it's definitely Prime Minister Elmer von Stern. Ryuji realizes he's in deep water now, especially since he basically just told the man in charge of the government that his current methods aren't working. It's a huge insult to his work, and it's pretty obvious that the Prime Minister and the king aren't seeing eye to eye on this at all. King Jorg breaks the silence by calling out Ryuji's name. The king looks down at them from his throne and tells him flat out that he can't give an answer on the request right now. He explains that a decision this big isn't something he can just do on his own authority, and Ryuji just closes his eyes and nods. He admits he knew from the start that asking for something this massive was a huge reach, so he's not surprised the king can't just say yes. The king agrees, but then his hand grips the armrest of his throne until it creaks. He says, however, and he looks Ryuji right in the eye, he tells him that as the king of this nation, he has to make sure his people's wishes actually matter. King Jorg looks Ryuji in the eye and gives his word. He promises to do everything in his power to make the request happen. The group walks away from the throne room, and Ryuji lets out a massive sigh of relief. He mentions that if the king keeps his focus on the southwest, they should be in the clear. As they walk, Ryuji teases Lin for being so nervous that she actually bit her tongue during the meeting. Lin gets super embarrassed and tells him to stop talking about it. Gotthard joins in, telling the two of them they did a solid job and that helping out was no trouble at all. Lin looks over at him, sounding a bit doubtful about that. Setsi meets them in the hall and tells them they did great work today. She's already ahead of things and mentions that dinner is ready for everyone. The vibe finally chills out as they walk together, and someone suggests they should all just relax and enjoy themselves tonight. One of them asks if they're ready to head out, and the others agree as they make their way down the hall together. Suddenly the scene shifts to a dark dungeon where someone is losing it, gripping the bars and screaming for their stuff back because none of this makes sense. It turns out Minori is the one locked up. Suzu stands on the other side of the bars and tells her to quiet down before she makes things even worse. A guard standing nearby agrees, telling them that causing another scene is the last thing they should do after the uproar they already caused. Lin looks completely terrified as the reality of the situation hits. Someone points out that being executed for high treason on the spot wouldn't be out of the question, making Suzu trail off in disbelief at the charge. Minori isn't having any of it though, yelling that there's no way Lin would ever do something like that. She's standing right by the bars as Lin tries to keep her cool. Lean tells Minori she's going to be okay and begs her not to cause a scene while Ryuji sits alone in the dark, realizing he's been completely played. He starts questioning who could have set him up and what they're even trying to gain by trapping him like this. After a second, he shakes it off. He decides he can worry about the details later because right now he needs to focus. He looks up with a sharp expression, saying the very first thing they need to do is find a way out of here. Then the story jumps back to earlier that night, right after the meeting with the king finished. The moon is out over the castle towers, and Ryuji finally gets a moment to himself. He drops onto the edge of a huge, fancy bed and lets out a heavy sigh, just trying to process everything. Earlier, the guards were leading them through the halls. Dietrich tells the group they've got a room ready for them in the back wing and suggests they should all just get some sleep. Ryuji watches them walk ahead, thinking to himself that while they were told to rest, things are definitely about to get complicated. Ryuji lies back on the bed with his hands behind his head. He figures that's finally everything he needed to get done tonight. He starts thinking about how getting that meeting with the king was a massive win, because it's going to give them a huge edge moving forward. Looking at the big picture, he feels like he actually gained more than he lost in the end. But then he remembers all the trouble he put the girls through. He knows he's got to find a way to make it up to Minori, Suzu, and Lean. He tells himself he'll figure out a way to pay them back later. But for now, he just needs some rest, until a sudden noise from outside makes him sit up straight. He's wide awake and totally alert in a second. He looks toward the window, wondering why he's hearing the sound of metal clashing this late at night. The look in his eyes changes instantly. He knows this definitely isn't just some normal guard patrol. He grabs his cloak and bolts out of the room, heading straight for the source of the noise. He finds the guards locked in a messy fight with a giant hooded figure, and things are looking pretty bad. Ryuji charges into the hallway where the fighting is happening. He yells out to the guards that he's there to back them up, and the guards are clearly relieved to see him. One of them recognizes him as being with Athena, while the other says his help is exactly what they need right now. Ryuji doesn't waste any time. He uses a magic stone to power up his strike and throws a heavy punch directly into the hooded figure's chest. Even though the hit connects, something goes wrong. Ryuji's arm gets sliced open as he pulls back, leaving him looking pretty stunned. He winces from the sharp pain, realized that the guy he just hit is way tougher than he looks. Looking closer at where he struck, he notices the texture under the cloak is solid stone. He realizes this thing isn't even human. The cloak finally rips open to reveal a massive, jagged body made of rock. It turns out they're actually up against a golem. The monster swings a heavy stone arm at him, and Ryuji has to drop low and move fast to avoid getting crushed. He gets back on his feet and quickly tells the guards that the only way to kill this thing is to find and destroy its core. He points out that the core is probably hidden in the golem's stomach area. The guards acknowledge the plan and immediately start their coordinated attack. Ryuji looks for an opening to smash the core while the guards distract it, but then Minori calls out to him. The guy just smirks, relieved that his team finally showed up to help out with the fight. He leaps onto the monster's back, deciding that since his normal punches won't work, he'll have to try something a bit more aggressive. He grabs the golem and tells it to just stay down for a bit. He slams a magic stone into its head, and the blast pins it down. With the golem pinned, Ryuji yells for Minori to go for the kill and aim right for its stomach. Minori yells back and charges in with everything she's got, ready to finish this thing off. She lands a huge hit that completely shreds the golem's midsection. The stone monster lies there totally wrecked and covered in smoke. The royal guards just stand there in shock, barely able to believe that the monster is actually down. Ryuji is standing there alone after the fight when a voice tells him it was an impressive show, but mentions he's late. Minori finally shows up with her sword on her shoulder, apologizing for the delay because Lane was a total pain to wake up. They take a look at the cracked crystal from the monster, identifying it as a synthetic mana core made with alchemy. Minori looks at the core and realizes this is exactly like the situation with the bear they fought a while back. Lean looks over the dark shard and confirms that it's definitely the same kind of setup as the previous encounter. Suzu walks up to Ryuji and tells him she's finished checking the area and she's pretty sure there wasn't an intruder. She explains that there isn't a single trace of residual mana leading out of the building, meaning the guard realizes the culprits must still be inside the castle, which Ryuji says is most likely the case. They move through the hallway toward a room, asking if this is the actual scene of the crime. The guard leads them forward, acknowledging them as the 4 members of the party Altina as they get to work. Ryuji and the group are standing there when a guard suddenly tells them they're all under arrest for causing the whole mess. Ryuji is completely caught off guard. He just stares back, totally stunned by the accusation. Chancellor Stern shows up and says the situation is just sad, claiming he's seen through their little plan. The group ends up locked behind bars, where Ryuji asks the Chancellor what he's talking about with these secret motives. Ryuji points out they were grabbed without any explanation, but Stern just tells him to stop acting like he's innocent. The Chancellor looks at them through the cell door and asks if they weren't the ones behind that big commotion. He explains the golem's core came from alchemy and tells Lean she's the one who made it. She can barely even speak. Ryuji calls out to him, admitting that Lean is an alchemist but trying to explain why that doesn't make her guilty. He says it's pretty short-sighted to decide she's the criminal just because of her profession, but then one of the guards snaps at him, asking if he realizes just who he's talking to in such a tone. The Chancellor cuts Ryuji off, telling him to just stop because it's way too late for them to be acting innocent, especially after what his men managed to find when they went and searched inside Lean's room. And as he holds up a dark crystal, he tells them they found a magic core that's exactly like the ones used in those golems. Lean and Ryuji both freeze up, their eyes going wide as they realize how bad this looks. And then Ryuji grits his teeth, knowing for a fact this is a total frame-up since there's no way Lean would ever keep a core like that. He thinks back to when Lean told him that even though this whole mess makes alchemists look really bad, she was actually relieved that Ryuji was the one who ended up bringing that golem along for the job. Ryuji had asked her back then if the real reason was just that she couldn't make them herself, but she just smiled and said that wasn't it at all, admitting that golems are super useful and a great way to help people out. She'd looked down, explaining that she's just always felt weird about the idea of trying to put a soul into an object. Lean looks at the massive stone golem, admitting that while they're useful, she's always felt a bit weird about actually making one herself. Ryuji listens, telling her he gets where she's coming from, and he gives her a smile, saying it makes sense for an elf to want to respect the laws of nature like that. He tells her she shouldn't hesitate to speak up if she has thoughts like that later on, because they're in this together. He thinks they should just keep helping each other with the stuff they aren't good at, which makes Lean look up at him with a soft smile, quietly thanking him for being so supportive. But back in the present, Ryuji grits his teeth. The memory fades as he realizes they have absolutely no way to prove they're innocent right now. Suddenly, Minori can't take it anymore and starts yelling that the mana core they found belongs to Lean, but Ryuji quickly shuts her down, telling her to just be quiet for a minute while his sisters look at him in shock. The Chancellor stares them down, saying that normally a crime like this would mean the death penalty, but he's decided to just exile them from the capital instead. He tells them they'll get some of their things back later, but until then, they need to keep their mouths shut. As the Chancellor starts walking away, someone calls out to him from the shadows of the prison. Chancellor Elmer stands before the group, looking down at them as he prepares to address the situation, and Ryuji speaks up from the side, asking if the King and Princess Cecily actually know what's going on here. Elmer doesn't blink, telling him it's only natural they'd know, and that both the King and the Prince are incredibly disappointed in them. This hits Ryuji hard. He grits his teeth with a look of pure frustration, simply saying he understands and giving a cold thanks. Later, the group is locked away. Ryuji sits alone in the dark, looking completely drained while Lean curls up in a corner, and the silence of the prison is finally broken when Suzu quietly calls out to her older sister. Minori looks over, asking Suzu if she felt that vibe from Ryuji earlier since he doesn't usually act like that. Suzu nods, saying the Ryuji they know would never get that angry over something that didn't involve his sisters. It's just proof that Lean has become really important to him. Minori smiles softly, adding that Lean is a precious friend to them now too, so they aren't about to just stay silent and let things end like this. She reaches out to the elf, calling Lean over so they can all be together while they figure out their next move. Minori keeps holding onto Lean's hand, telling her that she shouldn't look so down since she hasn't done anything wrong. Lean just looks back at her, feeling a bit better as Suzu turns her attention back to her brother, quietly calling out to him while she tells the others that if it's Ryuji, he definitely has a plan for this mess. She looks at him and asks exactly what she needs to do, so Ryuji finally looks up with a sharp grin, agreeing with her and saying it's time they got out of this place. He gives Suzu a specific task, telling her to try and use her telepathy to reach Lady Sesai. Suzu nods and says she's on it, and the two sisters focus all their energy on making the link, but even though Lady Sesai can almost hear them, the connection isn't quite clear enough. Suzu explains that there's some kind of magic barrier jamming her signal. Ryuji doesn't seem surprised at all, just saying he expected they'd try something like that. Lean looks at him, wondering how they're supposed to get a message through a wall like that, and asks what he's going to do next. Ryuji just smirks, telling her that it's actually a really simple fix, and he pulls out a massive glowing magic circle, saying he'll just crank up the telepathy's power until the barrier can't block it anymore. Lady Sess and her guard finally reach the cell, clicking the lock open and rushing inside. They look panicked as Sessa asks if everyone is doing all right. Ryuji and the others are waiting on the other side of the bars. He thanks Lady Sesai for coming to get them out, sounding relieved that the rescue actually worked. Sesai apologizes immediately, saying Suzu filled her in on the details, but she never thought things would get this bad. She's mostly confused about how this happened under her nose. She mentions that normally some kind of report should have reached her, but she explains the guards were just following their usual routine. They were watching the prisoners without actually understanding the real situation, which makes Ryuji realize that someone is definitely manipulating everything from behind the scenes. He's pretty sure the Prime Minister is the one pulling the strings. He starts wondering why Lean was targeted in the first place. He thinks about the Prime Minister and wonders if they framed Lean just because she was in the way. Ryuji stands there with his arms crossed, thinking out loud and asking why Lean is the one being labeled as the bad person here. Lean looks pretty drained by the whole conversation. She tells Ryuji that the way he keeps saying it makes it sound like she actually is a bad kid. Suzu speaks up right after, looking up at her brother with a serious face and asking if she's the only one who's actually a bad child. Ryuji looks completely floored as he starts putting the pieces together. He wonders if Lean and her alchemy were just convenient excuses used to kick them out of the capital. Minori looks down, admitting she's been feeling the same way about the whole thing. She tells Ryuji she's pretty sure that's exactly what happened, and then Ryuji goes quiet as a new theory starts forming in his head. He realizes that if the goal was to get rid of them because they were in the way, then everything must be tied to that dispel magic stone they found. He's certain that the stone and the curse on the king are at the center of this mess. He remembers how they broke that curse for Lady Cease in the first place. It hits him that they've accidentally wrecked the Prime Minister's plans twice now, and now that they've actually made it back to the royal capital, they're basically a massive obstacle for whatever the guy is planning next. Ryuji gets a serious look in his eyes as he speaks up. He realizes the Chancellor just wants them gone so they can't interfere with the king or Lady Cease anymore, and asks if the plan is to exile them for good. He turns to Lady Cease, who looks just as focused. She agrees that if the Chancellor is really pulling these strings, it's a serious situation that needs to be handled. She decides right then to take action. She tells the group she's going to set up an immediate meeting with her father, the king, right in the audience chamber. The scene shifts to the massive throne room where the king is waiting. Lady Cease warns them that the Chancellor will definitely be there, just like he was yesterday, so they need to be ready. The vibe in the throne room is tense. Elmer watches while everyone waits. King Jorg looks down at them from his seat, mentioning he's already heard the full story from his daughter and acknowledges they've been through a lot, but then things get serious. He tells Ryuji and the others that even though he owes them a huge favor, he can't just take their word for everything without proof, so he makes it clear that if they want to move forward, they're going to have to clear their names right then and there. The king brings up how he rushed out last night when he heard the fighting, remembering how his guards were taking on a suspicious guy when Ryuji's group joined the fight. It turns out that attacker was actually a golem powered by a fake monocore, and since that's alchemy, Lean was immediately flagged as a suspect and locked up. Lean looks pretty shaken as the king looks her in the eye and asks if that's really how it went down. She can only look back and say yes. The king isn't happy about being kept in the dark and turns to Gotthard, demanding to know why he was never told about any of this happening. Gotthard bows his head, admitting he didn't know a thing about it either, and points out that if the Imperial Guard is hiding information like this, it's a major problem. Elmer steps in to smooth things over, telling the king to relax while promising to look into the soldiers involved right away. Elmer keeps talking, pointing out that Gotthard can't possibly keep an eye on every single low-ranking soldier during training, so it would be pretty harsh to blame him for what happened. The king listens, and has to admit that Elmer actually makes a fair point. He then asks Elmer if he has any info on the situation himself, but Elmer just bows his head and says he has absolutely no clue about any of it. He even plays it off by saying that if the military officers don't file a proper report, the information never even reaches his desk. Suzu and Lean are not buying it at all, getting annoyed because the guy literally showed up at the dungeon, yet he's acting like he's totally out of the loop. Ryuji watches the exchange, knowing a guy like this wouldn't just slip up and get caught that easily. He realizes that for his group, who were supposed to be exiled and completely out of the picture by now, the only reason they're even getting a chance to speak up is because things took a turn the Prime Minister didn't expect. Ryuji knows they have to find actual proof of what these guys are up to no matter what. But Elmer is just standing there looking way too relaxed, and Ryuji can't help but wonder why the guy is still so calm. Lean and Ryuji suddenly freeze up as a heavy, crushing pressure fills the entire room. The floor starts cracking under some insane weight while Elmer just sits there, casually asking what all the noise is about. Right then, a massive wall of rock and debris explodes inward as a giant stone golem smashes into the hall, leaving the king and his guards watching in total shock. Lean finally understands why Elmer was acting so smug. He had this monster waiting the whole time, And as she calls out his name in a panic, Ryuji just gives a quick nod and keeps his eyes locked on the threat. He can see this is a total brute force play, but honestly it makes sense because for someone like the Prime Minister, killing them off is way faster than playing political games. The goal is simple. If they can't survive this fight, they lose their chance to prove they're innocent, leaving the massive stone golem standing right in front of them, ready to wipe them all out. Ryuji starts putting the pieces together. From the Prime Minister's point of view, playing small political games is a waste of time when he can just wipe everyone out and be done with it. Seeing the threat, King Jorg grabs his weapon and tells Gotthard he's jumping in to help, but the Knight Commander immediately blocks him, telling the king he's got to stay back and out of the crossfire. Ryuji steps in and agrees with the commander, telling the king that with all due respect, this kind of crazy situation is better off being handled by actual adventurers who do this for a living. He tells them to leave the golem to him and his group, but then he gives the king a sharp warning to keep a close eye on his own back. Elmer just stands there and clicks his tongue, clearly annoyed that Ryuji is onto his little game, while the massive stone golem lets out a deafening roar, ready to crush anything in its path. Ryuji jumps into the fight, calling out his diamond mana stone enchantment as he launches a barrage of rocks, shouting for the attack to hit home while the stones smash into the giant, causing a massive explosion of dust and debris. But the golem doesn't even budge, so Ryuji immediately doubles down by activating his Vajra release, pumping more power into the strike with a fuel magic stone to try and break through that heavy armor. The guy is starting to realize this golem is way tougher than the one from last night, and knocking something this big down is going to be a real problem. He tells himself he's got to hold the line no matter what until the others get back, and just then, he hears a voice calling his name. Lean, Minori, and Suzu finally burst into the room, out of breath and apologizing for making him wait so long. Ryuji looks back with a grin, knowing their timing is actually perfect for what he has planned. He doesn't waste a second and calls Minori over to join him on the front line, while yelling for Suzu and Lean to get ready, because it's time for the whole group to take this thing down together. Ryuji lets everyone know he's about to drop an enhancement spell on Minori, so he needs the rest of the crew to keep the golem occupied for a bit, and both Suzu and Lean shout back that they're on it, stepping up to face the giant pile of moving rocks. Suzu doesn't waste any time and starts her net of lightning spell, ordering the electric energy to wrap around the golem's huge body, as she keeps the chant going, calling out to the god of magic to lend her just a piece of that power. She finishes it off by asking for a hammer-like force to help them smash this stone monster, and suddenly, her non-spark web grid fires off, completely tangling the golem in a mess of crackling energy. The thing lets out a deafening roar as the magic holds it in place, making the whole room shake. Ryuji yells over the noise that once Minori's power-up is finished, they need to go straight for the legs to stop it from moving around, and Minori gives him a quick nod, ready to move in the second the spell hits. Lean is struggling with the output though, telling Suzu she's sorry but she isn't sure how much longer she can keep this hold together. Suzu stands her ground, deciding that she's seen enough of what this thing can do and it's time to end it. She starts chanting again, calling out to her god and asking for just a tiny glimpse of an even greater power, yelling that she's going for one final shot while a massive mechanical hammer begins to form in the air, as the legendary Mjolnir hammer slams down with enough force to shake the entire room. And then Minori sees her opening and shouts for Suzu and Lean to switch out, so she can finish the job looking completely locked in. She tells the golem that it's about to feel one of her own moves next. She lunges forward with her sharpness Kairi skill, driving her blade deep into the center of the stone beast. She doesn't stop there, following through with a massive horizontal slash that carves right through the golem's torso. The impact is way too much for the monster to handle, and it just explodes into a million pieces of rock, leaving Gotthard and the others watching from the side to celebrate, though he still wonders if they really got him for good. Dust fills the air as someone yells out for Lane, who stands frozen among the rubble. Ryuji grunts in pain as he takes a brutal hit, moving his body just in time to shield Lean from the blast. She reaches out in total shock, calling his name as he gets caught in a massive explosion of energy and debris that clears the room. Lean and Minori rush over to the crater, frantically asking Ryuji if he's still alive and finding him sitting on the floor, holding his head and complaining that every inch of him hurts. He realizes that if he hadn't used his diamond skill on pure instinct, he probably wouldn't have made it, but Suzu isn't having it, snapping that of course he's in pain after pulling a stunt like that. Lean looks at him with a mix of relief and worry, thanking him for the save but telling him he's way too reckless, leaving Ryuji with nothing to do but give a weak smile and apologize for the scare. Minori looks over at the chaos, still trying to process what just happened as she asks what that was. Someone agrees while looking at the massive crystal golem, noting that its healing speed is honestly terrifying. Ryuji locks in, sweating a bit as he realizes that if they can't find a way to stop it from moving, their only real option is to keep dodging those heavy hits and find a way to smash the core. Suzu speaks up from the side, telling him not to break the magic core, which leaves Ryuji confused. He asks how else they're supposed to win. She just gives him a serious look, letting him know she's actually got a plan in mind for this thing. Suzu turns to Lean, asking if she happens to have any oil mixed in with all her medicinal supplies. Lean just stands there with her eyes wide, completely confused why anyone would need oil right now. Nearby, the knights realize their swords aren't doing much against something this big and hard, while Ryuji tries to think of a way through. Dietrich looks focused, telling the group that for now, the priority is just buying enough time to keep the king and Lady C safe. Dietrich watches the group and realizes Ryuji actually has a real plan, so he tells the knights to trust them and just hold the line. Ryuji looks back and asks if everyone is ready to go, because they're officially moving ahead with the strategy, and Minori locks in with a serious look, giving him a quick nod to show she's good to go. Setsi shouts out her agreement, looking just as determined to see this through, while Lean acknowledges the order, keeping her focus sharp as the team gets into their positions. Ryuji charges in and starts taunting the golem, calling it a big oaf to make sure it stays focused on him. He slides across the floor, explaining that he'll keep the monster busy by dodging everything with his adamantine skill active, and Suzu and Lean move in behind. Waiting for that exact moment, the golem's attention is fully on Ryuji. Suzu launches her spark web, wrapping the massive crystal beast in a net of lightning to keep it from moving. Minori drops down right on top of the monster, telling it that it's finally time for it to go down. The massive crystal golem begins to buckle under the pressure, with deep cracks spreading. Its heavy body completely shatters the second it hits the floor. Ryuji stands back, watching as he tosses an oil flask into the mess, shouting to Suzu that he's leaving the rest of this to her. Suzu steps up and calls for her magic to manifest as a giant whirlwind, sending a massive storm of wind through the room that coats every single broken piece of the monster in oil. Gotthard notices the stones aren't reforming anymore, while Dietrich picks up a scent and asks if it's actually oil they're smelling. Ryuji gives them a confident nod and confirms that's exactly right. He explains that the golem's healing trick worked by gathering nearby stones to fix itself, so he used Suzu's whirlwind as the most precise way to coat the whole thing in oil, and now the slickness prevents the stones from bonding, so the monster will just keep slipping if it tries to stand. Ryuji looks over the wreckage and notes the monster is basically neutralized, and the girls are totally impressed. Lean calls the plan brilliant, while Minori says it's exactly what she expects from their genius mage, making Suzu get all smug. She just stands there with a proud little giggle, but then Ryuji gets back to business. He tells Suzu the mana core is still in one piece and asks what they should do with it, so Suzu looks over at the king. He asks if she wants him to come over, and she gives a quiet nod for him to join them. Elmer immediately loses his cool and yells that it's too dangerous for the king to get that close, but the king isn't having it. He just gives Elmer a sharp look and tells him to be quiet for a minute. Everything goes quiet as the king walks up to the group standing by the pile of broken stone, and Suzu begins her work. She uses her magic to pull out the history of the core, chanting for the past to show itself, revealing a memory from before. In the vision, Elmer tells someone the old core was destroyed, and the guy replies that he needs a much stronger golem next time. The vision hits like a ton of bricks, leaving everyone in the room completely stunned, and Ryuji finally puts the pieces together, realizing this was Suzu's plan the whole time she was holding onto that core. The king turns his focus straight to Elmer, demanding to know what the hell he just saw in that vision, but Elmer just stands there sweating, barely able to get a single word out while the king stares him down. Suddenly Elmer snaps and starts yelling that it's all a lie, claiming the girls are just showing a fake illusion to make him look bad. He keeps reaching out, looking totally desperate as he begs the king not to fall for their tricks, but the king just looks at him with pure disappointment, saying it's actually painful to watch him act like this. He shuts down Elmer's excuses by pointing out that this specific memory magic is so reliable it's used as evidence in court. And as the weight of the situation finally sinks in, Elmer drops to his knees without saying another word. The king doesn't waste any time, ordering his guards to take Elmer away and go find the royal alchemist who helped him. The guards immediately shout their compliance and haul Elmer away while he just slumps over, completely defeated and up above the castle. The clouds start to clear as the heavy atmosphere finally begins to lift. Standing out on the balcony, Setsi tells the group they were a massive help and says she's sorry for all the trouble she dragged them into, but Suzu just smiles, telling her not to worry about it now that they've finally cleared their names. Minori chimes in too, saying she really hopes they'll keep supporting their workshop from now on, which gets a good laugh out of the king, who promises he'll definitely be reaching out if anything else comes up. Setsi speaks up to remind him of something, and the king nods along as he pulls out a special document, handing Ryuji a sealed envelope. He explains that this contains the official plan for providing reconstruction support to the port of Southstead. Ryuji looks at the letter with a huge sense of relief, telling the king he appreciates it more than he can say, but the king tells him to think nothing of it, insisting this is just a small gesture compared to what he actually owes them. King Jorg looks over and asks Setsi if she agrees with everything he's said, and she just smiles back, giving him a quick yes, as the king officially calls them all heroes for saving the whole country. Lin and Suzu start cheering and waving while Ryuji and Minori just take it all in, feeling pretty good about the situation. Meanwhile, Elmer is lurking in the shadows after breaking out of his cell, worrying about the guards catching up to him in the castle town, so he hides out at a local spot with a hood over his face, grumbling about how things have turned into a total disaster. Right next to him, Guy is absolutely losing it, swearing about those annoying adventurers who ruined everything for them, while Elmer realizes he needs to leave before things get worse. Guy slams the table, yelling at the top of his lungs about where Ryuji could have disappeared to. Sean tries to talk some sense into him, suggesting it's time to finally give up on Ryuji since they still have that promise to keep with the guildmaster, but Guy just stares at him, completely caught off guard by the suggestion. He snaps back at his crew, reminding them that they're only in this mess because they were the ones who got caught in the first place, dropping the bombshell that they didn't just lose their standing. They got demoted all the way down to the 6th rank. Guy is stressing out big time, realizing there is absolutely no way they can pay off a 500 gold debt with the trash rewards from their new low rank. To make matters worse, Marie has been acting totally uncooperative ever since they got demoted, making the whole situation even more tense. A voice from the shadows suddenly calls Guy out for being so agitated, and Guy immediately spins around to demand who the hell is lurking there. The hooded figure just tells him to calm down, before mentioning that he happened to overhear them talking about a guy named Ryuji. Guy's interest is piqued right away, so he asks if the stranger knows him and how much the info is going to cost, but the guy claims he doesn't need any money. This makes Guy even more suspicious, so he slams his hand down and asks what the man's real angle is, and the stranger explains that he has his own debt to settle with Ryuji as well. Guy gets a dark look on his face and decides he's down to listen to whatever the man has to say, leading the hooded man to smirk, glad that Guy is being so quick to catch on to the plan. The hooded stranger leans in with a dark grin, telling Guy to kill Ryuji in his place. Guy looks down with a nasty smirk, agreeing that they need to get rid of him. Meanwhile, Ryuji is having a peaceful day, stretching his arms after finishing a batch of stones. He hears his name being called and looks up to see a familiar face. It's Lin, who tells him lunch is almost ready and asks him to go grab the others. Ryuji stands up with a smile, telling her he's on it before heading outside, where Lana and Lena spot him immediately, waving and calling out to their big brother. He walks over to the path and asks the two girls how everything is going, and they both cheer, saying things are going great while running up to meet him. The sisters explain that thanks to an intro from Thor, they've actually got people helping out. Lana explains that a ton of people from the merchants and workers guilds have shown up to help out, and she's also hyped that Minori and Suzu are pitching in, calling them a total lifesaver while Minori just smiles. Ryuji is glad to hear the news, thinking his deal with Marquis Leichner was definitely worth the effort. He looks over at the group of workers and makes sure to thank everyone for their help before telling the whole crew to take a break since lunch is almost ready. Lena immediately starts running for the food, but Lana has to remind her to wash her hands first. As the girls head off, Ryuji takes a second to himself, feeling like things are finally going well. But the story jumps back to a week ago, when a door opens to a fancy room where Ryuji and Lin are waiting on a couch as a man walks in, apologizing for being late. The man introduces himself to the pair, saying his name is Walther von Reichner. Walther gets the introduction started by mentioning the king honored him with the rank of Marquis, and Ryuji follows up by explaining he's just a third-class adventurer and an enchanter, while Lin politely introduces herself as well, saying she's also a third-class alchemist. Walther brings up that besides the official letter, he's heard rumors about Ryuji making crops ripen overnight. The local markets are apparently thriving because of it, so Walther asks if there's any way to do the same thing for other fields in the area. Ryuji says he'd love to help, but explains it's impossible since the special magic stones they need are too hard to get. Walther looks pretty stressed, admitting he's been hearing a lot of complaints from the other farmers lately. He thought about slowing things down, but that seems like a waste with the way the market is right now. Ryuji looks over and says he really wants to do something to help, but he isn't sure how. Ryuji asks if there's a way to make it work, and Lin suggests they could find people to help with those fields through the Commerce and Industry Guild, which leads to them talking about setting up specific rules to make sure the amount of stuff being shipped out stays fair for everyone. and Ryuji mentions how he thinks this plan could really help fix the money problems the local farmers have been dealing with lately. Walder thinks the idea actually sounds pretty good, though he says he'll have to check with the other farmers first before they decide for sure. So he suggests they put that conversation on hold for now so they can finally move on to the most important part of their meeting. Walder tells them the main thing he wants to discuss is the harbor, and he explains that because the two of them went and talked things out with the king, it looks like things are finally starting to turn around. Walder gives them a sincere thanks, but Ryuji just smiles and says they're going to benefit from this too once the trade lines are back to normal. And Walder admits that's a fair point, looking a lot more relaxed as he points out that getting things moving again is a huge deal, especially for people in their line of work as enchanters and alchemists. Lean looks pretty relaxed while she drinks her tea, but she mentions that it's basically a life or death situation for them. If they don't get people buying their potions and magic stones soon, they're in trouble, and Walder lets them know that according to the current schedule, the whole restoration should be wrapped up in 3 months. Lean asks if they can start trading with people overseas once the port is fixed, but Walder says he doesn't know for sure yet, even though he's convinced that if the king keeps taking the lead on promoting the harbor project, things will move fast. He looks pretty confident as he tells them he's sure it'll become the top port in the southwest again. The sun hangs over the quiet roof of the workshop as the long day finally comes to an end. Ryuji starts thinking about how far they've come, starting all the way back with that first request from Lady Cease, which turned into that intense duel he had to fight in Bessemer. After that, things just kept escalating until they were right in the middle of all that chaos at the royal capital. And now it's finally led to this business deal with Walder, making him realize just how much has changed lately. Things have been a total whirlwind for Ryuji lately, but over the last 2 weeks, he's finally settled into a routine, taking on a bunch of requests from the Commerce and Industry Guild. And it's working out great since he's been cranking out magic stones while Lean stays focused on her medicine. Ryuji looks down at his work with a huge smile, feeling like he's finally living the exact kind of life he's always wanted. Meanwhile, Minori and Suzu are out there keeping themselves busy handling all their various commissions. And Ryuji has even found time to help out Lana and Lena with their fields, fitting right into the community. He starts thinking about how once the port is fixed and trade starts moving again, they'll be totally set. He'd honestly love to just keep living this quiet, chill life forever. But suddenly a weird noise catches his attention, making him stop and wonder what's going on. He spots Lean nearby and tells her that he's been hearing that specific sound pretty often lately. So he walks over and asks her what she's actually been up to back here. Lean turns around a bit sheepishly and explains that she's just been doing a little bit of combat training on her own. Ryuji looks totally caught off guard, repeating the words combat training like he can't quite believe it, and he points at the weird weapon in her hand, asking if it's actually a gun, which Lean confirms by telling him it's a special alchemical version. She starts thinking back to all the crazy stuff they've dealt with, like that goblin hero and the massive golem they fought in the capital, and she tells Ryuji that since he's already done so much to help her out lately, she really just wants to find a way to be more useful to him too. The moment is broken when Suzu and Minori suddenly show up, with Suzu waving her hand and calling out to Lean, and she reminds the group that they all promised to go out and gather supplies today, asking if they should get a move on soon. Lean realizes she almost forgot and says she'll go get her stuff ready, while Ryuji decides he's going to join them for the trip. Lena looks up at him and asks if he's really coming along this time, and Ryuji tells her he needs to restock some of his supplies anyway, then asks how things are holding up over at the fields. Lana mentions that the Commerce and Industry Guild sent over some extra help, so they finally have enough people to handle the workload, and an older woman tells her and Lena that they've both been doing a great job lately. Minori flexes her arm and admits she gets pretty restless if she isn't moving around, and Suzu agrees, saying even a mage's body can start to feel a bit dull without enough activity. They look over the flowers they've collected, and someone confirms that this amount is plenty for their needs. Ryuji checks in with the group, asking if there's anything else they still need to find. Lean realizes they're actually running low on salt, so she suggests stopping by the salt lake to pick up some brine before heading back. But suddenly the air gets heavy, and a dark, creepy vibe washes over the entire group out of nowhere. Everyone freezes up with wide eyes, completely caught off guard by the sudden change in the atmosphere. Lean is left speechless by the sensation, while Minori admits she just got a really bad feeling about whatever that was. Ryuji stands there wondering what that strange sensation was, feeling a restless stirring deep in his chest. Suzu calls out to him, snapping him back to reality as he looks over, looking pretty shaken up by it all. She tells him she's got a bad vibe and thinks they really need to get back home as fast as they can, and Ryuji looks her in the eye and agrees, realizing she's totally right about the situation. Lean tells everyone to hurry since she's got a bad feeling too, So the whole group starts sprinting through the trees. They finally make it back but stop dead in their tracks, completely shocked by the sight in front of them. There are people scattered all over the ground, looking like they just got wrecked. Ryuji asks what on earth happened here, and Suzu points toward the field, telling him to check something out. It's a mud golem, but it's been smashed into a bunch of broken rocks and dirt, making Ryuji point out that while these things are usually fragile, he had his enchantments on this one. It shouldn't have been destroyed that easily. Lean rushes over to one of the guys on the ground, asking if he's okay and if he's hurt. The guy looks up at her, apologizing for what happened and saying he's mostly fine, but he drops some heavy news. Lana and Lena have been kidnapped. Lean's face goes totally pale as Suzu jumps in and asks who took them, but the guy just shakes his head and says he has no idea. He explains that 3 adventurers just showed up out of nowhere and started a fight. The guy looks down in shame, saying they tried their best to protect the girls but weren't a match for them. And Ryuji stands there thinking about those 3 adventurers while someone calls out that they've found something. Another guy walks up and hands Ryuji a piece of paper, saying some big dude told him to deliver it. Suzu takes one look at the note and realizes she knows that handwriting, and Ryuji grips the paper so hard his knuckles turn white. It's exactly who he thought it was. Ryuji looks completely livid. He stands there with a terrifying look on his face as he mutters Guy's name. The group heads straight into the ruins of an old building, walking together as they reach the spot where Guy is just sitting there waiting for them. He looks up with a smug grin and says he's surprised they actually came. He admits he has no clue how they managed to track them down to this specific spot, but Ryuji doesn't care about the small talk. He just glares at Guy and demands he gives Lana and Lena back, asking where they're hiding them. Guy says they're right there, and Marie shows up behind the 2 sisters. She tells Ryuji not to worry because they're safe. Lena looks over at Ryuji with tears in her eyes and calls out his name, while her sister stands there, completely losing it. Guy just scoffs at the scene and tells Marie that she's been doing nothing but interfering since they got there. He looks at the bruises on her face and asks if she hasn't been beaten enough yet, but Marie doesn't back down. She snaps back that he's just a little kid and there was no way she could just stand by and watch this happen. Lean looks over at Marie, feeling pretty worried about how things are going, while Guy just scoffs and says he's been acting like this the whole time. Ryuji looks at Marie and Sean, realizing they aren't going to be any help this time. They're basically useless. He thinks to himself that he never really trusted Guy to begin with, but it's still crazy how easily he broke his promise. Ryuji asks him what he's actually after and if it's all just for money. Guy looks totally blank, just repeating the word money back to him. A creepy grin spreads across his face as he starts laughing to himself. Then he suddenly acts like he's solved a puzzle, shouting about how he finally gets it. He puts on a weird mask and yells that he actually owed Marie money and totally forgot about it until now. Ryuji just stares at him, completely stunned by how much of a mess this guy is. Marie is totally caught off guard by Guy's sudden shift, shouting at him to wait and asking what exactly he's forgotten. Guy doesn't hold back, telling her that if he didn't owe her money, he would have ditched her a long time ago. Ryuji watches the whole meltdown, thinking to himself that Guy is acting completely out of his mind right now, and he presses him for the truth, asking why he even bothered kidnapping those 2 if money wasn't the main goal. Guy just gives this creepy smile from the shadows and says it's actually all pretty simple. But then, his mask flies off as things take a sudden violent turn and everything starts to go sideways. A massive explosion rips through the area, making Lean scream out in terror as the blast catches them both, leaving them shaken up and hurting as the dust starts to settle around the ruins. Ryuji quickly checks to see if Lean is alright, and she tells him she's doing okay for the most part. The 2 of them try to pull themselves together, but the shock of the attack clearly has them both reeling. The smoke clears to show Minori and Suzu being held by a dark figure. Ryuji shouts their names, seeing them right there, and Guy drops the act, showing off a twisted grin while explaining that his plan was always just to lure the whole group out. He starts ranting about how everyone treated him like an idiot for so long, all while tightening his grip on Minori's neck. So he turns his attention to Suzu too, promising to use his power to finally crush them both into submission. Ryuji isn't having it and lunges forward, swearing under his breath as he demands that Guy lets both of the girls go, but a magic fuel stone goes off right then, creating a massive flash of light that forces everyone back. Lean rushes over to check on the girls. Minori can't stop coughing, and Suzu says they're barely holding on. Ryuji realizes something is wrong after making contact. The guy doesn't feel like he's wearing armor, just bare skin, and Guy just laughs it off, asking Ryuji if he seriously thought a move like that would actually work on him. Ryuji stands there completely shocked as he looks at the enemy, finally recognizing the terrifying form he's taken. Ryuji looks on in total disbelief as he realizes Guy has actually turned himself into a chimera. Guy just gives him this twisted, creepy look and confirms he's right, while Ryuji tells him there's no turning back from this. Ryuji looks pretty disappointed, telling Guy he always knew the guy was an idiot, but he never imagined anyone would go as far as throwing away their humanity just for a power boost. Guy doesn't care and just smirks, asking if Ryuji is only acting bitter because he's getting totally wrecked. Minori jumps back into the fray, questioning the idea of being overwhelmed as she charges right in. She yells that she only got caught before because it was a cheap shot and now she's serious. She calls out a special move and slams her blade down with everything she's got, but her eyes go wide when she realizes her sword didn't even leave a scratch on him. Guy stands there like it was nothing and tells her the attack didn't work at all, leaving her completely stuck. Guy hits them with a massive shockwave that sends Minori and Suzu flying back. They crash hard, and Minori holds her head while asking Suzu if she's okay and saying she's sorry for the mess. Suzu is so out of it she thinks she might actually be dead, but Minori's just glad the girl is still breathing. Guy towers over them like a literal shadow, mocking them for having enough energy to keep talking. He laughs and says their chatter sounds more like a last will and testament, especially since he's planning to die anyway. Ryuji isn't having any of it and yells that he won't let Guy get away with this. Then he goes for a desperate move, charging in with the power of the Fura's magic stone to end things. But Guy just catches the punch with one hand, leaving Ryuji stunned that someone could stop an empowered hit so easily. Ryuji realizes this level of strength is totally beyond human, while Guy just enjoys the look on his face. Guy leans in close and tells him straight up that Ryuji's power doesn't even come close to his anymore. Minori is totally frozen. She's supposed to be this genius swordsman, but Suzu is just as bad, looking completely drained as the reality hits that even a genius mage can't stop this guy. Guy mocks Ryuji's whole setup, saying his special enchantment magic and stones are a joke, and he points out that Ryuji is just riding on his big brother's power. But right now, in this very moment, Guy tells him straight up that he's inferior, asking if the washed-up trash finally understands how outmatched they are. He decides to start the torture by crushing Ryuji's fist, making him groan in pure agony, while he promises that the left leg Ryuji used to kick him earlier is next on the list. With a twisted look in his eye, Guy says once Ryuji's limbs are wrecked and he can't move, things are going to get real nasty. He plans to slaughter Minori and Suzu right there while Ryuji is forced to watch them lie there helpless, and Ryuji can only let out a pained sound, his face twisting in horror as he hears what Guy wants to do to his sisters. Suzu and Lean can't believe what they're seeing. They both gasp as they watch the scene unfold. And Guy puts all his strength into crushing Ryuji's hand. Ryuji just grits his teeth. Lean finally steps up, pointing her glowing weapon right at Guy. She tells him to let go of Ryuji immediately, but Marie looks totally panicked. She asks Lean what she thinks she's doing, telling her straight up that there's no way she can win this fight. Lean doesn't back down, saying she knows she's outmatched. She's got this determined look on her face. She reminds Marie that she knew the risks too. She keeps smiling, even though things look bad, and points out that Marie only resisted Guy in the first place to keep the two of them safe. That's when Guy notices her. He looks over with this completely wrecked, scary face and calls them all insects for hiding out there, so Marie loses it and yells for Lean to run as fast as she can. It's too late though, because Guy just gives this creepy smile and says it's fine by him. He's more than happy to take on another victim. Guy stares down Lean with a twisted, scary face and tells her if she's so ready to die, he'll just kill her first. He calls her the bottom of the barrel and lunges forward with his hand glowing. He's ready to end things right there, but Lean just stands there totally shocked. She can't even move as she watches him start to change. Guy's face begins to melt and glitch out like a broken game. He tries to say the word mage and kill, but his voice is falling apart. Suzu and Minori watch from the sidelines. Suzu is confused, but Minori can tell that something is seriously wrong with him. Nearby, Marie pulls the two young girls close to protect them. One of them says she's terrified, so Marie tries to stay calm and tells them everything will be fine. Sean stands there frozen. He looks at his leader and can't believe what he's seeing. It's like Guy isn't even human anymore. Ryuji looks on with a bruised face, just staring at the mess and wondering what the hell is happening to Guy. Guy's body turns into a mass of black energy and distorted shapes. He's babbling about tomorrow and anomalies, but it's all just garbled noise, leaving everyone staring at a single, distorted eye in the middle of the darkness as the voice asks what's even going on. Sean watches his leader fall apart and yells out to him. The guy is totally losing it seeing his friend turn into that mess. And Ryuji sees Sean moving toward the danger and shouts at him to stay back. He knows whatever that thing is, it's not safe. The black energy keeps spreading as Sean just stands there shaking. He can't even process what he's looking at, just asking what the hell is happening while the thing that used to be Guy lets out a gross, glitched-out scream as his human side completely disappears. Marie grabs the two girls and tells them they need to run right now. Lana hesitates for a second because she's scared, so Marie gets right in their faces and screams at them to just get moving. She's got a look in her eyes that says she's staying to fight. Lana finally snaps out of it and grabs Lena's hand. They both agree they have to go and start to pull away from the fight, but then Lean hears her name and stops to look back. She's clearly torn about leaving everyone behind in this nightmare. Marie gives Lean a small, sad smile and asks her to please take care of the two little girls. She's ready to handle whatever comes next. Lean holds onto the kids and calls out Marie's name. She doesn't want to go, but she knows she has to get them to safety. Guy lets out one last human scream as the black energy rips through him. Lean can't even look, just standing there as she yells out for Marie, tears hitting her face while she tries to pull the kids away from the nightmare. Minori is totally frozen, just asking what the hell is happening while Ryuji and Suzu watch the transformation. It's getting bad, and everyone realizes the magic core inside Guy is totally redlining and going berserk right in front of them. Suzu warns the group that the black smoke is pure poison. She tells them to stay back because anyone who breathes in that core energy is done for. The corruption starts spreading fast, and Guy's voice sounds completely different as he says he's turning into a chimera. His body is literally breaking apart. Minori just stands there in shock, whispering Guy's name as she watches her old friend disappear into that thing. Nearby, the two little girls are crying and asking Lean where their sister went. They're terrified about what happened to her, but Lean puts on a brave face and tells them it'll be okay. She promises they're going to save their sister no matter what. Lean turns to Ryuji with a look of total focus. Calling out his name, she tells him straight up that their only choice is to destroy the core before things get any worse. She explains that since the fusion is still fresh, they have a real shot at making it in time if they move right now, and Ryuji looks back at her, locked in and determined. He tells her she's right, there's no time to waste, so Lean signals for Minori and Suzu to back them up. Minori draws her blade with a quick nod while Suzu gets her staff ready, both of them stepping up to help. Lean starts her chant first, calling on the spirits of the earth to mess with the ground and trip up the monster. At the same time, Suzu begins her own prayer to the god of magic. She asks for the power to create a mistletoe trap to bind the beast and keep it from moving. The duel spells hit perfectly, a mud snare and heavy branches wrapping around the monster's body. It's completely stuck, and the creature can only let out a pained grunt as it struggles against the magical vines holding it down. Seeing her opening, Minori jumps into the air with a shout. She puts everything into a piercing strike meant to drive right through its defense, and the blade connects with a heavy impact. Minori lets out a quick yell as she follows through with the hit, keeping the pressure on the monster. Minori keeps her sword ready and yells for the group to watch out. The monster is still moving, and Ryuji asks for an update on the situation. Lean tells him the thing is fast and tough, and since its wounds closed up right away, its regeneration is pretty good too, making Ryuji realize this is just like the golem fight they had before. He says it won't be easy to break the core even if they stop it from moving. But Lean has a plan. She pulls out a revolver and says she'll just hit it from a distance. She tells the group they should aim directly for the magic core. Then she turns to Ryuji and tells him to enchant her alchemy gun. Ryuji looks her in the eye. He stays silent for a second, just saying her name as he locks in. He tells her he's on it, giving her a serious look as he prepares his magic. The whole team jumps into action, a massive magic circle appearing as they launch a combined assault while Suzu starts her own chant. She calls out to the god of magic, asking for a piece of its power to fill her hand so she can get the strength needed to strike that monster down with a magic hammer. Minori yells out Gei's name, screaming at him to just stay still and stop moving. Suzu brings down her massive Mjolnir hammer spell, a giant bolt of thunder energy slamming into the monster as it grunts in pain. Unable to avoid the crushing weight of the magic attack while Ryuji looks on, noting that even after turning into a monster, Guy is still as stubborn as ever. Suzu checks in on Minori to see if she's doing alright. And Minori says she can still keep going, so she tells Suzu they just need to buy enough time for the other two to finish getting ready. Suzu agrees completely as Ryuji begins his enchantment, calling for a power that can pierce through anything to fill the gun. Lean looks down at the magic circle, thinking about how the last thing she was told was something horrible, but she knows Marie wasn't always like that. She remembers a time when Marie actually took a lot of pride in her job as a priestess, and was always working toward her dreams. Lean looks back on how it all started, remembering that Angela was actually the one who first invited her when they formed the party. Back then, Marie was a different person, saying that as a priestess she just wanted to help people. She told Lean that with her talent for alchemy and making potions, they could reach out and save so many lives. That was the moment Marie officially asked her to join up, and Lean can't forget that kindness. She realizes that even though things are a mess between them now, Marie is still a really important friend to her. Ryuji stands there looking at the ground, thinking about his own past and how they aren't really that different. He admits that just thinking about Guy and the others still makes him pretty angry, but that's not the whole story. They traveled together for a long time, and he never wanted to see them end up as monsters or meet a fate this dark. So that's why he's made up his mind to finish this. He's found a reason to fight that goes beyond just revenge. Lean looks down with her eyes shadowed, simply agreeing as she prepares herself for what they have to do next. Lin stands there with her weapon ready, telling Ryuji she has to save them no matter what. It's time for the final battle. She starts thinking back to how everything went south, remembering that at some point, Marie just became totally obsessed with money. It got to the point where Marie threw away her pride as a priestess and her dreams as an adventurer just for gold, but Lin still sees her as a friend. Ryuji looks at Guy's smug face in his mind. He knows Guy has always been a jerk, but he still has some complicated feelings about the whole thing. He thinks about how Lin dragged him into all this trouble. Though he never actually wanted things to end up this badly for anyone, Ryuji realizes that's exactly why they're standing here now, and Lin just quietly agrees as they lock in. They both know they have to help their old friends, even while a pair of creepy glowing eyes watches them from the darkness. Further inside, Minori and Suzu are getting absolutely wrecked by a massive shadow monster that's way too fast for them. The creature lets out a deafening roar while it lunges forward, knocking Minori through the air like she's nothing. Minori manages to land and immediately calls out to Suzu, who backs her up as they try to pull it together for one last stand. The monster gets caught in a massive spark web, a crackling net of electricity that pins it down while the beast roars out in pain. Minori gets caught in the backlash of the energy, screaming as the power surges all around her. She forces herself forward, calling on Bale to pierce through the enemy, which leaves Suzu completely stunned by the raw strength on display. The creature lets out a final pained grunt as a massive shockwave rips right through its chest, but it's not over yet. Minori realizes the thing is already starting to heal itself, and she can't believe it's regenerating again after taking all that damage. Suzu steps up with a look of total focus, telling the beast she won't let it recover. She raises her staff and calls out to the god of magic, asking for just a fragment of power to be granted to her. Suzu finishes her prayer, asking for the mistletoe that can end this monster for good. She unleashes the Mistletoe spell, and black spikes slam into the creature's body. The beast is totally caught off guard by the sudden holy light filling the dark room, and just when it seems like they might have a chance, Ryuji and Lin finally show up. Ryuji points his hand forward and tells Lin that now is the time to. Lin looks ahead with total focus, calling out to Marie and telling her that she's going to save her right now. It's a massive burst of energy that fills the whole area as the attack connects, and the bullet flies straight for the target. Lin thinks about how Ryuji enchanted the shot with sharpness, knowing that with this gun she can finally pierce through the enemy's shell. The impact hits hard, and just then the monster lets out a huge roar as its core gets blasted right in the middle of its chest. Minori watches the explosion and says he actually did it, looking relieved that they finally landed a hit. But Suzu's face goes pale as she looks at the smoke. She can't believe what she's seeing and asks if this is really happening. The core starts moving, and Suzu realizes the monster is already trying to regenerate its mana core right in front of them, which sends a wave of panic through Lin. She starts calling out Ryuji's name as a blinding light starts to glow, and the beast's face appears through the dark, growling that it's not over yet. Ryuji charges in with everything he's got, telling the monster that it's finally over. He gets right in its face and says he isn't giving it a single second to regenerate. He knew Lin's shot would make a gap for him, so he rushed in to claim the win, slamming Cancer's magic stone directly into the beast while lightning sparks everywhere. Ryuji focuses on the hole Lin made in the core, knowing if he hits that exact spot, the whole monster will just fall apart. It starts dissolving into light and smoke as Marie finally opens her eyes. She's lying on the ground looking completely out of it, but Lin sees her and starts tearing up, yelling out that she's actually awake. Lin pulls her clothes and tells her how glad she is that she's okay, and finally Marie looks up at her and just says Lin's name, realizing she was saved. Lin looks over at Marie with a worried expression, asking her if her body is holding up okay after everything that happened. Marie is sweating and clearly exhausted, but she manages a weak smile and says that she's doing fine. Lin turns her attention to Ryuji, who is slumped over and looking totally trashed, telling him he looks like he's in way worse shape than Marie is. Ryuji explains that what they're seeing is just the massive recoil from using the Ansvar stone. It was one of the highest grade magic stones he had, capable of giving someone a huge physical boost, but it definitely leaves a mark. He forces a strained smile, admitting that the pain is actually so intense he can't move, and it even hurts just to talk. Moving on, Lin gets a serious look on her face and tells Marie there is one thing she really needs to know. She asks where she actually got that synthetic magic core, thinking back to how unhinged Walder looked with it. Marie looks down and says the name Laudinger, explaining that he claimed the stone was handed to him by a man who holds a serious grudge against their group. Suzu starts thinking about who that could be, wondering if it's the Prime Minister, but then remembers that guy should have been arrested a long time ago. Marie puts the pieces together and realizes the guy they're talking about is the same one Suzu mentioned. Suzu adds that the dude apparently broke out of prison not too long ago, and she remembers how the guards burst in to drag Walder away right after they finished their conversation. The whole group is just taking it all in, while Marie looks over at the elf sisters with a soft smile. She tells them she's really sorry they had to go through such a scary experience because of everything that went down, but Lana just shakes her head and tells her that's not it at all. She gives a huge thanks for keeping them safe from that guy, and Lena joins in with a big smile to thank her too. Marie doesn't say anything else, she just pulls both of the girls into a warm hug. Moving on, 2 months pass by, and the scene shifts over to a huge, bustling port city where massive trade ships are docked right in the heart of the town. Suzu is clearly loving the vibe, yelling out to Ryuji that she really wants to grab some grilled squid from one of the stalls. Lena is just as hyped, calling out to Minori because she spotted some fresh herring for sale just a little further down. Lena asks Suzu what she's planning to eat, and Suzu replies that the grilled fish is fatty and delicious since it's in season right now. Ryuji watches them all run around the market and wonders why everyone is acting so restless. He notices that Minori is being the most hyper out of all of them. Lean walks beside him with a smile, asking if it isn't great to see things so lively. She tells him it's a festival for the reconstruction, so he should just try to enjoy it. She adds that she's honestly just happy the harbor repairs were finished way ahead of schedule, and Ryuji totally agrees with her as they look out at the ships. He starts thinking about everything that happened with Guy, remembering how Marie promised she was going to whip those three back into shape. Ryuji figures that if Marie really has changed for the better, then they can definitely trust her to handle things. He feels like they've finally earned some real peace, so he decides to take Lean's advice and just have a good time at the festival. Just then Thor spots him from the crowd and waves, calling out to get his attention. One of the locals catches up to Ryuji to thank him for the magic stones from the other day, mentioning how much easier the work went because of them. Ryuji just smiles and tells him it was no big deal, asking the guy to keep supporting their workshop as the man happily agrees. Another woman waves over at Lean to make sure she knows she's appreciated too, which catches Lean a bit off guard as the woman thanks her for the medicine she provided for her husband, saying he's thrilled that his back pain is finally gone. Lean can't help but giggle, telling the lady she's just really glad to hear that the medicine worked so well. Suddenly, a guy drops a massive hunk of meat into Ryuji's arms as a token of appreciation, leaving him standing there a bit confused while someone else tosses a giant striped fish over to Lean, telling her she's gotta take some of their stuff home as well. Before they know it, a huge crowd of locals starts swarming them with gifts and thanks, and Ryuji can barely process everything that's being handed to him. Suzu and Minori watch from the side in total shock, seeing their friends literally buried under a mountain of food that the townspeople piled on them. It's a pretty great moment for the whole group, standing together in the street and realizing just how much they've actually come to mean to this town. While the group is standing around in the middle of town, someone calls out from behind that they look like they're having a great time. It turns out to be Walder von Reichner, who shows up with a smile and tells them that all the energy in the city is thanks to their hard work. He looks over at the elf sisters as well, making sure to mention that their fields have been doing awesome lately. 2. Walder goes on to say the whole market is actually thriving because of them, and he's really counting on everyone to keep up the good work. Lana gives a polite reply while little Lena just cheers with a huge smile on her face. But then Walder turns his focus back to Ryuji and Lean, getting a bit more serious as he addresses the two of them directly. He tells them that once the festival is finally over, he wants them to come over to his manor for a visit, leaving the two of them curious as he promises they'll see something pretty interesting there. And soon enough, they arrive at the massive estate. As they head inside, Setsi is there waiting for them in her full royal outfit, smiling as she greets them and says it's good to meet again. Lean and Ryuji just stand there completely frozen, with Ryuji barely managing to stammer out that she's the princess. The princess tells everyone to just call her Setsi to keep things casual, while Ryuji barely manages to say her name. Setsi just smiles and confirms it, leaving Lean standing there in total silence. Setsi looks out toward the estate and mentions that she actually came into town to check on the harbor, but she noticed that compared to everywhere else, there is a ton of high-quality food and produce moving through this city. She looks genuinely happy as she talks about how wonderful it is to see that all the people here look so healthy. Turning back to the group, Setsi suggests that the good vibes in the city are probably thanks to their hard work, and Ryuji gets a bit bashful, rubbing the back of his head while he admits that they've definitely been helping out. Ryuji gets straight to the point though, telling Lady Setsi that he's completely out of magic stones, so he can't do what he did last time. Setsi looks a little surprised and says it's a real pity that he can't repeat that performance, so Ryuji wonders why she's so disappointed, realizing from her face that she probably expected him to say he was out of supplies. He tells her that this is actually perfect, because even without the stones, Lean can still whip up a potion to improve the soil quality. Ryuji explains that while the plan is solid, they'll need to make some tweaks based on the soil and environment. So since the medicine is already working great over in Southstead, he can personally promise that the stuff is effective. Setsi listens and says she gets it, admitting it's a cool idea, but she still has one major concern because she wonders if it's even possible to make enough medicine to cover every single field across the whole kingdom. Ryuji just gives her a confident look and says he's already thought ahead about that specific problem, and he pulls out a document, showing off the full recipe and instructions Lean wrote for the potion while Lean loses it in the background. Lean is completely caught off guard, frantically asking Ryuji why he's even carrying that around in the first place. Ryuji reminds her they talked about selling recipes to keep the shop running and says he knew a situation like this would come up. Lean looks pretty stressed out and tells him that even if they talked about it, she still needs a minute to get her head right. Ryuji tells her there's nothing to fear after helping the king, then asks if she's just doubting her own work to get a rise out of her. Lean snaps back that those are two different things, and she'd never be so irresponsible to hand over something she wasn't confident in, telling Ryuji he should know firsthand just how effective her work is. She reminds him that without her medicine, the backlash from Ansvar would have dragged on way longer than it did, and Setsi speaks up to agree, saying the medicine Lean makes is actually wonderful, which catches Lean totally off guard. Ryuji looks at Lean and tells her he fell in love with her work from the very start as a craftsman, and he says from now on they're going to combine their strengths at Altina to make their work known to the whole world, the two of them together. An enchanter and an alchemist, making things that can brighten the future for as many people as possible. Ryuji asks her if that doesn't sound amazing, and Lean just stands there taking it all in, while Setsi jumps back into the conversation, mentioning that the castle has the best facilities and top-tier court alchemists available. She's certain that by combining those resources with Lean's recipes, they'll spark a total agricultural revolution across the entire country, and Lean finally lets out a small smile, admitting she supposed that's true. Lean looks over, completely surprised when someone suddenly calls out her name. It's Setsi, who gives her a warm smile and asks if she's willing to sit down and talk through all the details. Lean doesn't hesitate for a second, bowing deeply as she shouts that she'd love to, while the others just stand by and watch. Later that night, the moon hangs high over the city as Ryuji and the girls walk through the main square. Ryuji looks up at the sky, just taking in the quiet moment while the rest of the group follows close behind him. A lot has changed since then, starting with the burn mine finally opening back up for work. And now that the harbor is fully restored and magic stones are moving again, it feels like they've got the wind at their backs. The plan is that once word about the soil improvement potion spreads across the kingdom, things will really start to move. Ryuji knows there will be plenty of tough spots ahead, but he's sure that with Altina, they can push through anything. Watching him, Minori can't help but notice, and points out that her big brother actually looks like he's having some fun for once. Ryuji looks back at Suzu and admits that just thinking about the future really gets his heart racing. He follows it up with a wink and a thumbs up, saying craftsmen are always happiest when they can make whatever they want. The girls take that in. Minori looks thrilled while Suzu and Lean just give him a warm smile. Walking under the moonlight, Ryuji tells them that when they've got a little free time, they should help him gather materials, and Minori is all for it, telling him of course, while Suzu tells him he can leave it all to her. Ryuji pauses for a second, looking a bit more serious as he says there's one more thing. Now that the workshop is finally up and running for real, he wonders if they should make a sign for the place. Minori gets super excited at the idea, raising her hand and shouting that she should be the one to draw the pictures. But Suzu shuts that down instantly, claiming Minori's art looks like it would summon an evil god, so it's a definite no. Lean looks pretty concerned after hearing that, asking Suzu what kind of drawings Minori actually makes.